Well, we're here at our 2022 Camp Kicking Bear charity event, and you can see all the people we have around us right here. So there's gonna be a lot of questions that we're gonna talk about and answer as we go throughout the property. It'll be hunting and habitat related. So I hope you guys enjoy all the questions and the discussion back and forth with this group right here. Okay, anybody have any bow hunting related questions?
So I shot muzzies, the rockets for years. I recently switched to the range expandables, had a couple failures. Went down to my local guy that sets up my bow, went down to the smaller, the hybrid, hypodermic, smaller, 1.5 cut. Thinking about going back to a fixed blade. I mean, what's your opinions on, everyone has an opinion, right?
Yeah, we probably each have strong opinions. So,
yeah. So
we just go down the list. And
so you know, some of it can be bad shot placement with an expandable.
Sure.
But I do know, I've noticed that even target practicing with the broadheads, that I feel like my flight is a lot better with the expandable at 60 yards. Yeah. I shoot out to 60 yards. Yeah. With target practicing versus the over 20 rockets.
Let me ask you one question, and you're welcome to answer this. Do you know the expandable that you used, was it the Taipan?
It was the first one I went with was the Rage. It was like a 2 and 3, it was a big cut. And it did not have, it had a softer tip.
Okay.
So I went to so now the expandable I'm shooting is the hypodermic Rage with the titanium tip.
Yeah, those are good.
Yeah, the hypodermic is good, and they're good with the mechanical part of it, that you don't have to have the slip collar. I will tell you that any broadhead, even though the manufacturer tells you it shoots like a field point, you go out and test them, because with your bow and your setup, it may not be the same as a field point. Next thing you know, you're shooting 6 inches to the left and you missed your turkey. And that can happen. So for me, whatever broadhead you use, accuracy is everything. The Rage heads have made a tremendous hole, as some of the other mechanicals do. But on the other hand, a well-placed broadhead, and my wife was shooting a 2-blade buzz cut. You couldn't believe the critters she took down with that, with a light poundage bow. So just knowing your equipment and being confident with it is everything. So you can answer what you want.
Yeah, I mean, I agree everything with that you said, and it's like everything has pros and cons, right? So it's like you could pick up, like a Schwacker, a Rage, a dead meat, and shoot them pretty much the same as your field point. They're super small. But then with a expandable broadhead, you're more subject to it malfunctioning when you hit bones, if you're close to a shoulder, anything under the sun, hard quartering shots. There's just more variables. A fixed blade though, on the flip, is way harder to tune. It's like, especially a 4-blade or a bigger 2-blade, like you really got to pay attention. You really got to pay attention on your fletching size is a big thing too, 3 fletch or 4 fletch. You need a lot of steering in the back end. You can't be running a super small vane. So it's like, it's pros and cons, and it's all personal preference. It's like, what are you looking for? Are you shooting far? Are you shooting something bigger than a deer? It's like, there's no right answer, so it's like, what are you wanting to achieve? And then this is what you go with.
I think one thing that Chris said is very important. The back end of that arrow is what steers the front. I was shooting high poundage bows. I shot 4-inch 4-fletch, was as much of a helical as I could. And I shot a 2-blade cut on contact. It was 150 grain, 1.5-inch cut. And it was a new archery product head. They could not figure out at the time why I could shoot the bottoms out of pop cans at 100 yards with it. On the other hand, nobody did the kind of work and research that I did. And really, it was the back of the arrow, the amount of twists you got on those vanes that caused that arrow to spin like a bullet and be accurate. So I wanted 2 holes in the animal. I wanted the entrance hole, and I wanted the exit hole. Didn't matter if I was hunting a grizzly bear or a brown bear, or if I was hunting an elk or a moose. I wanted 2 holes in them. And I'll tell you, the 2-blade head will take them down just as quick as anything else, as long as it's well placed. So just know that. You got vanes, everybody has their own way of putting their vanes together. Sometimes you got to go out and do your own research on it and figure it out for yourself. You might end up with four 4-inch veins on there with a helical on it, but if they fly true and you're able to shoot a fixed blade head as good as a field point, that's your confidence. So, sorry.
No,
It's,
yeah,
it's,
I agree with you. Yeah.
It's interesting we open up with a broadhead question. That's like one of the biggest hot topics you can pick for YouTube. You might as well go right into vertical bows and crossbows, for the next discussion. But when it comes to broadheads though, I know like I migrated throughout the years. We're back in the day shooting a bear in 1992. That was a Satellite Titan on a 2317 aluminum arrow. The arrows are probably 29 inches long. And it was 150 grains. I had a 5-inch helical vanes on to steer it, and that zipped right through the bear and skidded through the moss on the backside up in Canada. It was about a 300-pound bear, and then I started using the rocket heads, the expandables in '95. Used those all the way to 2010. Used the Wolverines, used the hammerheads, 125 grains down to 57 grains of the Wolverine, and they all killed deer. I didn't like that some of those where you had a steep angled shot. That I got a buck back in 2010. I shot him 10 days later, the same buck, and he had a stripe. And I shot him, he was quartering like this, shot him right down below me, and that blade hit, and it got one blade with blood. It rode down the side of the animal. And I knew that because I got the animal 10 days later, and he had a stripe in him. Like that, just rode around the outside. So I wanted something with more penetration. Switched over to TrueFire T1s, the Muzzies, the G5 Montec. They're slick tricks. They were the small, solid little heads. Carbon Express F15, I like those. They flew pretty well. But then you're getting a little hole like that through them. So then you're not getting much of a blood trail. Let's say you miss the lower liver, which can be terrible if you, let's say you hit the lower liver and you don't hit the heart and it's an 1/8 inch off. That could be a day-long tracking job or until it dies. So then I went back to that hybrid where I like I use the Muzzy Trocar HB, and then Dylan, it's a slick trick I'm trying this year.
Assassin, maybe?
I think it's Assailant or Assassin. And that one's the same thing. It's got a nice 1.5-inch cut with 2 blades, and it's got 2 solid bleeder blades. And that to me, and it's a hybrid, but it's almost like I like that combination between the two because I still get good flight characteristics. I still get the cut on impact, solid heads, and then you get a little bit wider cut because like you were saying with the Rage, if you get a 2-inch cutting diameter and you hit them back in the guts, there's a huge wound channel and they're gonna die. And that's where if you shot them with one of those little cut on impact, the little fixed heads, you're not gonna get much of a hole. So I like that blend between the two, and it's kind of almost like a non-answer because it's not siding one way or the other, it's in between. But those fly, we'll shoot them out here to 80 to 100 yards, and like Ray said, and Chris, they don't fly exactly like your field points.
No, they don't.
But I find they're consistently off if your arrows tune well and the back end's good, and they might be 2 inches to the low right or something, and you'll carry that out through that range. So
It was a perfect time to ask because it's the two that were failures were both those in this early part of the season, and they were both with the big 2.5. I can't remember the tip, but they don't have the titanium tip like that.
Chisel tip?
Chisel tip.
Yeah.
There you go, the chisel
Yep.
tip. And they were both shoulder shots. They weren't far into the shoulder where.
I mean, yeah,
Muzzy,
a shoulder shot with a mechanical is just, you're done.
Yeah.
It's
and
not
even a lot of fixed blade.
a lot of fixed blades
I mean,
too.
you hit that, you hit a certain area on that shoulder, a certain angle, it's not breaking.
Yeah.
Well,
So,
unless you're shooting the bolt that Ray does.
so what they're talking about is pretty eye-opening. Years ago, they came out with a Zwicky head, and it's a great head. But I was shooting 104 pounds on my bow, and I went to Africa with it. The first animal I shot in Africa, now around here, with that kind of poundage and a 2-blade head, I mean, it went through anything.
What was that poundage?
104 pounds.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but that's what I hunted with. That was what I did, and I shot turkeys, and I shot. Well, I will tell you,
Show off those guns if you have them.
That's why you cut them off.
it's what you're comfortable shooting. That's what I did. I shot every day. I'd shoot 100, 200 rounds all the time. But the first animal I shot in Africa, I hit bone on him, and I would have thought it was an impala. I would have thought it buzzed right through him, bust the bones and everything. What it did, it took that head and curled it right around like this, and that arrow did not penetrate through the animal. It did kill the animal, and when I walked up, the animal was laying there, and I'm trying to pull the arrow out, I can't figure out what's going on. And I found that the center of that broadhead was weak enough that when it hit bone, it curled it around. So that's why I switched to a 2-blade head that had a thicker shank on it. And then as a matter of fact, I did the exact same thing on a sable, which was a much bigger animal, and it's on film. You can see the arrow hit bone, go like this, and go right through it in slow motion. It just goes just like that. So it went off the bone, it didn't curl around and went through. And African animals are different than North American animals. If anybody's had a chance to hunt Africa, the heart and lungs are right here, and their bone structure goes like this. But here, if you hit an animal like this, you're going right in the bone. So I had a lot to learn in Africa. I did do my research, but a little off, and boy, I'll tell you what, you gotta have the right broadheads. So.
Yeah, I think the moral of the story is like what's more important is hitting what you're aiming at. You know, it's like if you could shoot a deer you could kill a deer with a field tip, you know, if you hit in the heart. So that's, I feel, more important than anything.
You know, a lot of people think Ray cuts his sleeves off to show his muscles off, but really he just flexes and they just fall apart.
We have so much fun with kids out in the outdoors. I don't care how good a shape you are in, you'll never be kicking bear tough because everybody goes away sore for 3 days. And I'll tell you, I try to stay as cool as I can because within 15 minutes, whether it's nice or not, you're soaking wet because some kid's getting back at you for squirting them. It's just fun. So yeah, I try to stay cool.
Any other burning bow hunting questions? He was asking, what's your name? Sam? Samson. Samson was asking if you see a deer behind a bunch of branches, do you basically try to find a little hole to put it through and shoot, or do you wait? And
I've had some bad experiences with that, where you hit a branch like halfway in between even, and it's wild what your arrow will actually do. Even little tiny branches, it can kick them way off to the side.
way off.
Like even if you think you maybe have your aiming spots clear, your arrow actually goes up and comes down, so it's actually not maybe clear. It's always good just to wait.
I had a deer last year on a water hole right over here, and I had a vine that kept swinging into my sight picture, so I leaned out around, and you can see when I shot, it actually, the vine blew in at the same time. We didn't even realize it. It just wondered why the shot looked so bad and why it looked weird. But it actually, the vine went in, the shot went off, hit the side of the vine jerks out of the way. You push your arrow over to a box elder tree, went off the box elder, went in through the back end. The broadhead came up to the front right here. It went 60 yards and it actually died on film. So it was, and that's going back to, if that would have been a wide expandable, I think that would have caught something. And I'm not saying you're buying a broadhead based on bouncing it off trees. But a concern is though, is that while you're never trying to shoot through brush, it happens. Yeah. And it does happen. It's low light. You thought that was a clear lane. I mean, it doesn't take much. And so you want to be very, very careful because that was pure luck. That was just, you could never recreate that.
Was it a vine scrape?
It didn't go off the vine scrape.
That'd be funny.
Yeah.
I actually thought about going down and cutting the vine because it kept blowing over. It was really bothering me, and it was clear to begin with when we cleared that site, and it kept blowing in. And so when I got down there, I considered getting down, actually pulling it over, cutting it some way, risking ruining the hunt. And when I got down there after shooting, I looked up, the vine's about 12 feet in the air. So it wouldn't have made a difference at that point, but it was very, very irritating, to say that.
I think the only thing I want to add to that is this. I try not to shoot through anything. Even a barbed wire fence will throw me off if I'm looking at it. But the fact of the matter is, if you shoot through the brush or you try to make a marginal shot and you wound that animal, you got the rest of your life to think about what happened, because it just makes me sick when I try to make a perfect shot on something and I don't. And what you're doing is, it's not fair to the game either. You're better off to not even take the shot, because if you take the shot and you wound them, you're going to be sick. You're going to make the animal sick. So let it go. There's another day coming. So just, and it's hard to do sometimes, but
Can you make some comments on the stand, height of stand, placement in trees?
Yeah. I like, I've gone through around, it used to be we'd use 14 tree steps, and with my stubby legs, that got us up to about 24 feet. And over the years, and that was open hardwoods a lot of time, and it seems like it was pretty high up. Now, with the family tradition ladders or other climbing or other sticks, I'm about 20 feet. We hung one yesterday. We're looking downhill, and you guys will see it. As long as it's not too slippery going out, but it'll be, it's in an oak tree. The ladder goes up 20 feet, and then we're actually stepping up over a branch and down into the stand, and it's probably 17 and a half, 18 feet off the ground, but we're looking downhill. At a water hole, it seems like you're a long ways up there, but I go out on public land. If I'm using a climber, a lot of times I'm up, I feel safe in the climber, and I'm up 25 feet, 26 feet, 27 feet, because it's all open hardwoods. And you're looking across, deer coming from open hardwoods or on a bench or something, it looks like you're right there on the ground if you're too close. But that could vary. I mean, I have some that are 13 feet up in red cedars or white cedar where I'm already up on a ridge or a point, wind's blowing off, so then you don't have to be up that. I have one of my favorite stands in Coon Valley that's 13 feet high, and I think that's what it is to the base with those ladders. But
Yeah, I think it's really situational, depending on what's going on. I will say, like, my to kind of not copy what you just said, but like my mobile hunting setup, I try to get pretty high because it's obviously a hang and hunt. Deer don't normally see a big blob right where you're going to be, so I try to be
especially
25.
on public land where they manage for big trees.
Yeah,
A lot of
that
times.
too.
Federal land, state land.
I'm not scared of heights, so I've gotten like 30 plus before for sure.
Yeah. I'm scared of heights.
as far as for me, I like to be up off the ground, try to be 18, 20 feet, but I like to use whatever I got around me to cover me up. So a lot of times, if I know the main trail is right there, I will put my stand to the side so that critter, like he's talking about, the blob in the tree, I'll tell you what, if they're coming, and if they're coming uphill, they'll catch you right now. So I like to use a tree or something put in front of me so that when I can let the animal go by and get the shot I want. And sometimes it ain't possible to do, but I just feel more comfortable and more confident on my shot if I can be more hidden. And that has worked for me.
Yeah, that's, you guys will see here in a little bit, we have a redneck blind that we're actually bow hunting out of. And that's all we've done out of that one because it's a small little food plot. It's a pass through on the way to a big food plot next door. And then they go out to the ag field. So it's something we can just watch them moving through, kind of just a little window. But we're only 5 feet off the ground. And it's because that gray dogwood bush that's there might be 10, 12 feet high. And if we use a 10-foot stand, let alone, I'll go to a property and they have a 15-foot stand in a situation like that. And here's this big black square to a deer, 5 feet, 8 feet above the brush, and it's completely sticking out. So in that case, being 5 feet off the ground, and the other, you can see the ladders right there in the corner. That's the other 5 feet that we didn't use for two of the stands out there because they're only 5 feet tall. We have the ability to put them up 10 feet. It's just we're getting them out of cover.
Yeah, I think
And in the cover, you can shoot them on the ground. It's just you have to be in cover.
being skyline is huge too.
Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah.
You'll see that in that situation, that redneck is about even with the top of the bush. So it's just an extension of the bush that's there. You know what, we probably take one more discussion topic if someone has something, and then we'll get while the getting's good. It looks like the rain's gonna pass, and anyone else have anything? Any of you kids? I was just gonna say, what's your question?
How old do you have to be to get your own bow?
You know, every state's different, but to get your own bow, is that a question for your dad? Is he not? You can, so borrowed bows, Kicking Bear will take you out, and that's what you guys are doing
Yep,
right now.
yep.
And what's the youngest kid you've had shoot at your 3D course down there? Even last year, I know there was a kid that threw a hatchet into a target that was around 3.
That's right.
No, you don't
So-
just give them the hatchet and...
Everything we do with Kicking Bear is safe for the kids, and we know what we're doing. We've had some really young kids shoot bows with us, and as a matter of fact, that kid shot a bow that day, and we helped them with the shooting, and they actually let go of the string and everything. But yeah, we started them kind of young, and it's fun, and so it'll be safe. So as far as getting your own bow, you're about ready. Don't say nothing to Dad.
Yeah, don't let Dad hear that one. But you're ready to shoot out on the course. I mean, he's old enough to...
Yeah, he's coming. You better come.
We're going to look at the weather here a second, but I think if anyone's pulling it up right now, we have a really good break now. It's clearing out. And it's not going to get any drier at this point out there and saturate. So we're going to have a little caravan going out on the property. This looks rough right now, but it used to look like that. Literally, those trees, brush, gray dogwood. We cut it all out and mowed it down with the brush hog, sprayed it with 2,4-D and Roundup. And then within a few days, Brandon was out here back there and planting in the corn. And so I have to come back here with 2,4-D and Roundup, and I'll hit that here pretty soon, maybe even in the next 3 or 4 days. Now hit it, and that'll probably be the last time we have to spray it or do anything with it. Brandon puts I think it was 50 gallons of liquid nitrogen per acre. It's time release. So we've already have our nitrogen on here. We don't have to worry about a second application. In the past, he had done about 30, Brandon. So then we had to add nitrogen more, but we're gonna go without it this year. I put plot start on it to begin, and if there are any pH issues, I put 2.5 gallon jugs per acre. That's about 1.25 acres. It goes all the way back here. And so we'll take care of the weeds, and I expect to get good corn out of here. Again, it looks rough right now, but that's kind of like, we can do that with corn. Imagine how many food plots have made like this where there's never been a food plot there. We're just going in there and mowing it down, spraying during the summer, and then putting our fall blends in. And then the following year, I'm adding the buckwheat blend in the summertime so that we can actually plant the larger seeds into it. But it's made a really good way throughout the years, going back 20 years or more, where we can actually go into a fallow field, in this case, gray dogwood, cherry trees, cutting them down and getting a great food plot that first year. But again, just like the switchgrass, you have to control the weeds. You have to. There's nothing you're going to plant in here that'll smother the weeds. That'll give you a good crop in the fall for the deer. And so even if we put buckwheat in here and rye rotations and build the soil, but if we're not actually, if I just have rye here, I'd rather just not plant it when we're here in the ag area. If I was in the UP of Michigan, northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, layering rye in here would be perfect because it'd be all woods and the deer would like that green. Out here, just having the rye, I'm wasting my time almost. And so, you talk about different rotations that you can control and build soil, control weeds, but really it boils down to, in a case like this and the crops that I want to plant out here, I have to use chemicals, unfortunately. So then next year, we're limiting our use of chemicals by rotating with buckwheat, and those are soil builders as well. The bottom line is, on all these plots, no matter what we're planting, I'm never going to rip up the soil. There's no reason for me to ever plow this, ever disc it, and ever work on this. And what we'll do is, I use tillage radish as a rotation a lot in the fall. We'll use heavy tillage radish with Nebraska planting when I plant my greens, which half of this is actually planted, will be planted in greens down here. And we can flip this corn back and forth once we establish switchgrass on the outside border. Then that tillage radish is breaking into the soil, avoiding compaction. And we have another plot, we did this on the other side of the hollow over here that we can't get to right now with you guys. But Brandon said this food plot here was actually, the compaction wasn't that bad. It was actually pretty decent. Where on the other side, we have more compaction, but we still have corn coming in. And so it's hard to, I mean, if you just look at the shrubs and everything around here and look over here, that's what this entire field was. In fact, when Dylan and I were filming here, we found 3 sheds.
In like 5 minutes.
In 5 minutes, yeah.
Guess how many I found?
How many, Dylan? Dylan actually has you could say a dislike for shed hunting.
Disdain, I guess. Yeah. Just not my thing.
We like doing it for going out for a walk on the property and stuff, but it was cool to find some, and we found another one with my son Sam, who's here somewhere, I think back at the house, but with that too. all of this is, we have to hide this. And so we have switchgrass on the outside. We'll talk about switchgrass lines so we can get around here without spooking the deer in here. And one of the things we were taking a gamble on is if you see the camper right there, that's where Jim lives. And if Jim was standing up there, I'd have him wave, but he's not there. He has no power, he has no heat, but he's been out on the property. He was on the original property we bought over there. And when the owner that had that property moved in, or bought the property, I think 10 years ago, he forced Jim to leave. So Jim came over on this property, which is literally across the line from our old property. Like, you know, he's 10 feet away from the old property. So he's been here now for about 10 years. He was over on the old property for about 10 years. So 20 years he's been living out here like that. He's a Navy vet from back in the day, I think in the 80s. And he just likes being by himself. And so we let him live there for now. And this is the second year. He signs a camping lease. And we try to look after him here and there, but he doesn't really want that. You know, he talks to us, he's funny. He let Dylan take a picture of him.
Oh yeah.
He does. He's got a really good sense of humor. He's very smart. So, but so that's the one thing. He does come out of that. This is like his backyard almost.
Sweet corn would be pretty nice for him.
Oh yeah, he'd like that. Yeah. I bet you he'll eat the young corn. You guys ever do that when it's about finger size? I love that. It's really tasty. I've been told not so good to eat it when it's full of pesticide, and especially early with all the chemicals they put on around here, but either way it tastes good. So, but he's the one concern, so that's why definitely the corn on this half for the year. We'll try to fill that in with switchgrass, and we'll see how things go with them in the future. You see a lot of this garbage here. I just had a roll-off. There's a trailer out here that I had taken down, crushed. They brought a roll-off off. Of course, I'm gonna do it all legal, and they left the propane tank, tires, but the amount of trash on this 67 acres is oppressive, and bags of trash. So we're in the process of removing that, all that trash out here, the old truck. They're supposed to come get that. They have till October 1st, we'll see. But we're starting to take matters into our own hands because I get sick of looking at it in some places. So, but this is a big part of what we're doing here because we have corn here. I don't want the deer necessarily, we have greens down here, but I don't want them necessarily hanging out while we're accessing on this top side or going around this spot until it gets into, we find they're hitting the corn about mid-November, end of November, around here into December. So this is a perfect late season spot to start holding some of our bucks. It's flanked by 2 acres of green over there, about 300 yards away. I was gonna go that way, but it's just too wet. And then we have another green food plot over there along with 2/3 of an acre of corn. That's that way. We have a green hunting plot that way. We have a water hole that when you go to the back corner there, you go about 150 to 200 yards over. That's a water hole down across the ravine. There's a ravine ditch crossing. So everything starts to fit together here. We have water that way. Those water holes are about 500-600 yards apart. We have more switchgrass past Jim. And again, that switchgrass over there, we want deer to bed inside that switchgrass, so that's why we have it there. It's on that outside layer so that we have switch, bedding, and then the interior of the land. And then that leads to the food. So everything is connected right here. And that's why I wanted to take you guys here because you'll see this 67. It relates to the rest of the property. We have a skinny 38 and then 140 over there. So it's the 140, 38, 67. And really this is a very unique spot with several draws. If you guys are looking it up on an app, whether it's HuntWise or Onyx or HuntStand, you can kind of see all the change in topography and different types of habitat. So we've tried to take what fields we can and turn them into food and then leave a lot of this inside for hunting strategy. So I can see hunting this in the late season, but we'd come in here behind the switch, get back in here. This would be more of a gun spot. And we have around 13 food plots in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and we hunt 3 with a bow. You guys are gonna get to see 2 of those today. And the rest we don't hunt with a bow because they're designed to support the habitat. It's critical. And without that food, we wouldn't have deer consistently all season long, so you don't have that ability to build a herd. So we hunt those with a gun, muzzleloader. This 2 acre field over here, we call it the blade plot. I shot a buck out there with a muzzleloader long distance, but unless we're off long distance hunting that, we can't hunt it because we're gonna spook deer and getting in and out. So, but again, the establishment of this, it looks kind of messy right now, but it'll be really beautiful here in just a couple weeks after all these weeds die. kind of a sickness. I put a Exodus render right over there before I left on my Michigan trip. You know, came back Wednesday. And so it's been about almost 2 weeks. I put that there because I love watching weeds die and I love watching the corn come up. I didn't even care about deer or anything else, turkeys. I just like, it's satisfying watching the weeds die and the corn come up. I can't stand weeds. So they're the death of all food plots. Obviously, if we just let this go right now, it'd be a mess. We would get, I don't know what the yield would be. I don't know if there's any farmers here, but the yield would be terrible if we allow these weeds to come in. And we're getting briars coming in and regeneration off cut logs. And you can see all the briars that were down here that are coming back. So we'll kill those shortly. And we'll stay on it.
Tell me though, it takes 28 days for all the weeds to come out of the ground. So even though it looks weedy here,
you got some new ones coming too.
Yeah.
You got to let them come so you can get them all killed.
Definitely. Yeah, and that's why it's so nice having good rain. And so after we'd killed this, there's probably a lot of weeds like you're saying that came up well after we mowed this down, hit it with 2,4-D and Roundup, because now the soil's exposed and you'll keep getting weeds. And so we'll have herbicide treatment on the greens down here going into the fall. We'll have multiple. And then next year, certainly herbicide treatment, pre-emergent, and then another application, 2,4-D and Roundup before the corn's put in. So let alone the applications will give us really good area that's been chemically controlled to frost seed switchgrass end as our border coming down this edge right here and then on that side up there. So we can hide this in. It'll be just critical.
Mr. Sturgis?
Sure. Hi, Jack.
Roundup being kill all the things that it touches, why do you use 2,4-D and Roundup?
Yeah, it's a good question. Roundup is it's very low power on pigweed, water hemp. Hey, Brandon, what's some of your favorite weeds? Yeah, and so a lot of that is another one we have out in Coon Valley that I have over there is called smartweed. It's like a vining weed. They call it smartweed because it avoids chemicals, but Roundup it'll kill most things decent, but certain things it won't kill at all.
Did you say pigweed it won't?
Right, yeah, pigweed. So we hit it, we have 2,4-D, and I've had, like the smartweed in Coon Valley, I hit it twice last year with 2,4-D and Roundup. And so we're using 1 pint per acre 2,4-D, 2 quarts per acre glyphosate. And I didn't make that up. That was something 15 years ago I learned from farmers over in Coon Valley. That was a mix that they spray when they're doing no-till practices and to get rid of their weeds on top of the atrazine and everything else they're putting in the soil. So it's some of those, it's just enhancing the Roundup for the broadleaf. Yeah, you can mix them right together. And the 2,4-D is a broadleaf killer. So it greatly enhances the broadleaf capabilities of the glyphosate.
Do you have to put oil in with your mix?
I don't. I used to. I've been spraying it since 98, 99 around in there. And I used to use surfactants and then the AMS, I add the ammonia or the nitrogen into the, so you get a better kill with the Roundup. But it seems like every mix that you have now already has those ingredients in it. So back in the day, the Roundup then was $125 for a 2.5 gallon jug. It seemed crazy expensive. The generics were $31 last year. And then this year for 13 jugs of the 2.5, I paid $121 a jug. And now they're up 200, Brandon. Yeah, it's just crazy. Yeah, he's planting. Brandon plants in Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan. Is there anywhere else? Like Indiana? Not yet. So he plants a lot of acres. How many acres do you think you plant a year? Have you?
We got about 260.
Okay, for just food plots. You guys have any more questions here? Oh.
When I see like that looks pretty low in there, so I'm thinking as it goes in there, it's pretty similar to this. Would you ever knife up in there to make a little more of a pinch point up on the other end, like a lobe, to try to make the deer move around the end? Would you consider
in this
strategy of
in this case, I want them going this way out into the ag fields after dark. And I'm not hunting in that location. We might in the future, but if I did, it would be back in the brush. And if I did that, it would be used with travel corridors where I'm cutting the timber perpendicular and away from the travel corridor and then find a nice natural crossing down there so that we can sit up in this area. But the thing is, our access is right on the other side. So deer, most of the time up here, that the ag is just, it's not that far away. So typically they're not coming all the way from the main part of the woods up here and then going back again.
Do you ever use the shape of the food plot to create a pinch point on one end or the other? Or?
I do, and like you'll see on the food plot, we'll end up back here. We're not expanding that because then it makes it too large to hunt with a bow. But it depends on the lay of the land. And I think sometimes people try to force a certain shape because they have to put an hourglass in, and it in an hourglass, you have a pinch point in the middle, and it in no way fit with the natural movement of the deer. And so anyway, I like to, like this is a holding plot. They get here, they hold, they go out there after dark. And so we're not hunting on here. So if I was hunting, I might make a little natural constriction in here or something else. But in this case, it's just, we need the food here. We'll hunt it with a gun from a distance. The food plots in Coon Valley, we've never hunted with a bow since 2014. Because if we do, we're going to spook the deer off them. So it doesn't matter what shape it was, anything we did, we're going to spook the deer. So we hunt them with a gun from the distance, and then we hunt in the morning up on the hills waiting for them to come back to us, or we hunt in the evening on the sides waiting for them to go down to the food. So it sets the pattern of use for the entire property. They're critical, but it wouldn't matter what way we shaped them, anything. We're just trying to fill space there. There's hardly anything flat. So we're this year I might even try, well, I'm going to, I didn't talk to Brandon about that recently, but I want to put on, our lower area floods out a lot, and there's a lot of erosion. I turn that to switchgrass, and then we have a hill, and there's a chance of erosion. So if I put corn in there, that's better erosion control than beans, but adding wheat or rye to beans in the fall is better erosion control overall than corn. And then you can plant into that. The only problem is if I use beans there, I have to fence them in completely. So if I put an acre in there, I'd have to leave them fenced in all the way. And then that's a complement to the green plots we already have out there. But either way, we still wouldn't be hunting with a bow out there. We're just taking space that's the flattest and using what we think we can plant without tipping the tractor over. Oh, and you see here, we could go a little bit further into the woods with this plot. It flattens out, and then it's a steep draw, really steep in there. Over here, it's a bone field from all the cattle that died out here for decades. They stuck all the bones right back there. It's weird to go into that area. It's just a bunch of bones. So, but you know, to adding to the different form of garbage that's out here. But,
did you line this and switch already, Jeff?
No, we're waiting to kill it, and then we'll line it next year. And on this inside, it depends. If I leave that brush line, then I might not put the switch, but the switch is really critical where we're standing. And then this whole top, I'll go maybe 12 feet wide because I don't want to take away too much from the field here. And on this end, we're going to have switchgrass. This is the first year, but we'll have second year switch out there. Even if we mowed it a couple times, we'll still get a good 3-4 feet out of it. And then we'd have switch starting on the inside of here too.
Does it make sense to, when the corn gets up and it starts to turn brown, to walk through and spread rye to help keep weeds under control in the following spring, and then also create some food, kind of a cover crop?
It does, but it depends on your spacing for, and Brandon can answer that maybe a little bit more, but it depends on the spacing of the corn, how much shade there is. So I've seen people do that, even clients I've had, and then they got no growth out of the rye. But you can get a spring planting of rye, and then like Brandon planted end of June, early July last year. We did end of June the year before that and used the 85-day corn. So that's an option too, actually putting a soil builder in for a couple months, like wheat or rye, oats, building the soil, and then killing, terminating, and drilling your corn in to that thatch. And so you get a little boost of nutrients, and then you get weed control. And then you can avoid erosion a little bit more in the springtime. So, but yeah, it's the same with beans, getting in the wheat and rye into the standing beans so that you can have good erosion control. And then planting more mid-June, late June with the beans, so they're late green bean going into the hunting season.
What'd you do with the brush that came off here?
You know, it's crazy. The brush that we actually mowed down like the gray dogwood is all right here. Really? That what we took off, and Dante, I don't know where Dante's at, but Dante's back there in the corner. But Dante actually, I'd cut down these cherry trees, cut them in half or thirds, and then he's younger, stronger, works out all the time. So he was a good horse for taking everything off.
You just pulled it into the woods? Or?
Yeah, like down in here, you can see some of the dead tops, like along here where you see some brush. And then we just drug, you can see some of it back there, but just drug it down into the woods.
How much can you get away with? Like, I've got some poppled areas that are 10, 15 feet high now that I want to clear, but it's pretty thick, you know, and I'm afraid of making big piles.
Yeah, and that's in the bad thing about that too, in the popple, there's so many shoots per acre that it can be really difficult to hunt. You can look around here and find some stumps. We didn't have a lot of big, we had trees in here. We cut about 60 to 80 trees, and it took a couple days to completely clear. But this wasn't full of trees where we had 400 to take out. So those popple can be problematic with that. And then like you said, you know, our brush, our gray dogwood and briars, we just mowed down, and it's right here. It'll basically be dust by the end of the summer. It's amazing how years of thatch can turn into basically dust. You know, you go out to most fields, like if you're out in these fields right here and you just take one kick, the soil's right there. So
I'm assuming that on this land you don't have anybody coming in like on a lease and farming where they're going to come in and harvest, but around here or generally, what impact do you see from people coming in and harvest in late October, you know, early November on the hunt?
Really none, other than like if we don't have our own food here, for example, they'll go for a 3-week period towards the end of October and first week or two in November. They'll take all the corn down here, they'll chop it, and then they'll pick the rest, and then they manure it, and then they chisel plow it all in about 3 weeks. So that change, you know, people rely on ag and ag production for their deer hunting, and that's, you're always going to be, you know, grossly behind. But yeah, I was sitting out here last year in a stand, and the farmer's out back, you know, right behind me, you know, working the fields, just what you have to do. But
a lot of people here have within their plot of land some tillable land that they lease out just to pay for the habit. You know, you get the fix, right? You need to...
So I always look at like even on the land around here, if I had ag land, I would have either converted it or sold it to the farmer, because it does mean nothing for my whitetail property. And if it's an investment, then I'd rather take that money and do something else with it that had a more appreciable return than just renting it to the farmer in ag land just to own land. I'd rather take that and buy another piece of property or something. But so the way they broke this property out around here is they did it by a terrace. So above the terrace, you had enough room to drive on in most locations, and then everything else that was ag was sold to farmers, and then hunters bought everything from that terrace down into the woods. So it was a really smart way to do it, because I've seen places where people don't own until 10 feet in the woods, and they're literally hiring a bulldozer to go in and create a hill road for them and carving it out on the inside of the woods when the neighbor's ag is 20 feet away. They could have just had a road up there if they split it out properly. But bottom line is I don't want any ag myself, so I'll go to properties, they say we own 900 acres, but they have 80 acres of woods. So it's an 80 acre parcel, not a 900. Maybe it's separate parcels, but they really don't have 900 acres for hunting. In fact, the other 780 or whatever it is, that 820 acres is not doing them any good. Like around here, you know, we have all the same farmer all around. They don't own any woods, they don't hunt. And so it makes it really, really nice for just, I'd rather buy a smaller property. You have 50 acres, you know, like people that have 100 acres, they have to rent out the 30 acres, and they're pinched to even put a couple acres of food plot in there. I'd rather see someone own 50 and have total control and actually make something good with those acres that they own. But, you know, a lot of times that doesn't work because someone's owned the land for years and it's passed down in families, and so that's not always feasible. But we were pretty blessed here not to have any ag land. And someone had asked about access through here, through that open field. Well, a lot of our food plots are tipped down. Like we own this is a 45 acre field, and it goes back 3/4 of a mile. It's narrow. And so we have all our food is tipped down in. So you really can't see more than 20, 30 yards from those food plot edges up into the ag field, because they all go up. But we own a 33-foot easement, or 33-foot piece of land we own all the way to the road that we drove in on. And then we have a 33-foot easement on the other side. So the discussion with the farmer is, which side do you want us to put our 30 feet of switchgrass on? And so that's going to happen next year. We've owned this for 2 years, but I'll let them decide which side they want. I don't really care, but we're going to put 30 feet of switch all the way back so that we can have a tunnel with our truck access, bikes, side-by-sides, whatever, to get back here.
Easement, you do not own the land.
No, but we own the 33 feet. So then we own the 33 feet on this side. We have an easement on the other. So we have 66 feet of right-of-way. And so for that, we have a little flexibility. I don't really care. So if the farmer tells me to take this one or that one, it doesn't really matter. So we'll just let them decide, but it's going to happen either way.
So 30 feet wide of switch, and then you're gonna drive right down the middle of that.
Yep.
Switch.
Yeah. So we'd be covered up on both sides by at least 10, 12 feet, 10 feet, at least 11 feet.
So are you doing that to try and avoid them seeing you when they're out in the fields when you come in the morning?
Yep.
So
yeah.
In Indiana, a lot of it's cornfields for me. So you would suggest planting it on both sides of you and then going down the middle to try and get to your stands?
Yeah, it depends on, so I've seen people do that. They go right through the middle of a cornfield and there's deer on either side of them. And out here, the deer really aren't out in the fields that much. Right. They focus on the food plots. They're out here at night. And so they are scattered throughout because it's the same food everywhere. Right. As far as ag. So they're not piled all in one spot. It's a little bit more difficult when you have this 80 acres of ag, this 80 acres over here, this 40, but we have hundreds of acres around us, couple thousand that are all ag on the three sides. So that makes it a little bit easier because deer can be everywhere. And so we're not spooking out an entire herd of 50 that's in on one ag at the moment. Plus alfalfa, they hit it a little bit in the fall, a little bit in September, a little bit October, but by the time you get into November, that's really not a food source for them. So the alfalfa is stemmy and brown, and it's been frosted out, shrivels up, and then the corn's been picked since early November, and beans been gone since October. So there's really not, and because they're good farmers, there's not much. They're really good farmers. They have a good reputation around here, the Johnsons. But because they're good farmers, there's nothing left in the fields either, and they chisel plow it half the time. So it's there's really nothing out here but our food plots when it gets into that time of year. So I think what we'll do is we'll get back into vehicles, and this is where it gets a little bit more dicey. This is an area that's really important because that cornfield is just right over there, maybe 150 yards to the corner of it. We can slip around this. We don't want to make any bedding area improvements up there. We want solid switchgrass so the deer are not bedded here. They feel comfortable behind it, but they don't want to bed in solid switchgrass because they don't have a food source. And so there's plenty of other areas for them to bed on the inside of the woods where there's hardwood regeneration. And we have a bedding point over here that we specifically made for them. We want them over there 200 yards from here, 150 yards. And the ditch crossing is right here. It drops off. There's a ditch down below, and there's a crossing down there about 40 yards into the woods, and that goes right over here to a water hole. And so we can come all the way around here, hunt a buck that might be going to the corn, going to the food plot over there, going to the food plots up here. We're just kind of in that X of movement where we can hunt them on that water hole back in the woods. So we'll go down there and talk about that. But this was important to get this all in switch. So this was all the brush you see around here. This is what that was, that edge. So we brush hogged this, hit it with simazine, frost seeded switchgrass. It's full of switchgrass right now. And you want to see, there's some switchgrass that's a little taller, and then there's some that's still short. But the switchgrass that's coming in has a small red stem. It's round. It actually takes a lot of abuse coming in. And then when you pull the switchgrass leaf away from it, it'll have hair right on the leaf there. You can see a little bit of fuzz. So you want a round stem, completely round. And then if you have that hair on the inside of the grass, not on the shaft, but on the grass right there, then that's switchgrass. It's really easy to tell. I wouldn't advise you to pull them all out of the ground, but but if you look down, you could see switchgrass coming in. There was no switchgrass coming in here when I left to go to Michigan. So it was one of those areas where 2,4-D and Roundup was applied maybe 5 weeks ago. So I was just wondering. I didn't kill it, and I didn't think I could, but it had me a little worried. So it was really nice to come back and find switchgrass here and there growing out here. But we will mow this probably when the switch gets up and the weeds are up into that 12, 15 inch of height. We'll mow it back down to 5 inches. We might mow it again in July. We'll probably let it go at that point. You'll start to see the switch coming up above the growth because it'll grow so much faster. And then next year we might mow it in May and let it go. We did that with some of our 2-year-old switchgrass this year, where we mowed it and then we're gonna let it go. And I imagine because of the weeds in here and the way this started, this was not a food plot, it was not an open area, it was just brush, that we'll have to mow it in May next year. Maybe we'll mow it a second time, but eventually we won't have to mow it anymore. And to come back in here and mow this is not a big deal. You know, you're done quickly. It's just a matter of doing it and making sure you do. But what it does is, imagine the switchgrass here. Well, those deer that are traveling on this inner line down here and crossing the ditch and going through this lower level over here, they feel a lot more secure and comfortable when they're looking up and they see this bank of switch. If we just left this open and they're on a water hole down there and they can see a tractor out here in the field, then not enough cover. And so that switch gives us that instant cover where they feel comfortable using a water hole during daylight even more. I would suspect in this area, because we're not getting hunting pressure, there's no one pressuring but us, that they'd feel very comfortable hitting that water hole if we didn't have the switch. But the switch ensures that the oldest bucks, or assures that the oldest bucks in the neighborhood will hit that water hole down there. And so then for that we have a stand right over here in an oak. So we can't wait to hunt this. This setup right here, it's kind of like the corn, the water hole that's 500 yards that way, the green food plot there to the side, and then this food plot here. We're getting in the middle of all that movement, and then we have the bedding ridge right out here that we'll walk out on to here in a little bit. Just ask again, you guys watch for the corn, because we're going to be walking in between corn rows to get out there. But I want you guys to see what it looks like when it's growing. And plus Brandon told me that's when he was planting, so that's when we're planting. So, but it actually worked out nice. We didn't have to rely on late day corn and a bunch of moisture to get it going. So this is a really cool setup, and we have Family Traditions tower stand that we're going to brush in a little bit more, and we have screening planted in front of it, so we'll be able to hunt the end of this with a mock scrape set up and a little greens. We'll show you that. But this switchgrass, again, it's really critical. There's switchgrass growing in here. And where's John? John, can you tell if it's Cave and Rock or if it's RC Big Rock?
Too short to tell.
Yeah. We have John has a variety out of Canada, RC Big Rock. It's very hardy in the north, and so he starts selling that this year. How much did you get of that this year, John?
6,000 pounds.
And next year it's going to be a lot more.
30,000 pounds.
Yeah. So he'll have a lot next year.
It never stayed on the site more than 24 hours, so it's
Yeah.
a pretty good variety. So.
And there's only a couple of you that can sell it in the country.
Yeah, there's like 6 distributors that actually can import it. I mean,
Yeah.
food plot seed companies or feed mills or whatever will end up getting it, but there's 3, 4, 5, 6 guys involved where we get it right from the farm. Comes out of there, cleaner, into a bag, right to our shop. We're the only one in Michigan that'll import.
But John, if you want to pick out a piece and just have people pass it around. Yeah, if you want to pass that around, John. Yeah, that one looks good. Yeah, that's cool too.
Beautiful.
Look at that, even like potted it. That's
You got good soft soil.
So Jeff, when you were looking at buying this piece, what was, I'm assuming you went through and you've looked at hundreds and thousands of properties across the country. What made you settle in this area or this piece or whatever? I'm helped out a couple of friends look at some, properties and using some of the video stuff that you've done on fine tuning pieces they have.
Yeah.
We're helping them out with that stuff, but we're looking at buying our first piece, and if you got a couple of things.
There's a few things, and I have a few videos out there on buying property and what to look for. Just a few common threads. Like when we were coming here, we knew it was a good area to begin with. We have a lot of big landowners around here. We're one of the smaller ones at 245. So that was enticing there. It's a good area. It's not, like Kansas, Kentucky bucks where they're just, I've seen some freaks down there that, but we have good solid big bucks. The first year we shot a 170. That's probably 6 years old. I like buying property that has low timber value, and high timber value property, that means low wildlife value. That's all open hardwoods, oaks, maples, cherry, whatever it is. The higher the value, the worse the potential wildlife value. We have areas like that out here, but it's a 10%, it's a 15% thing, 20%. And then we have a lot of the edge. So when you have low value timber or low value habitat that a logger's not going to even bother looking at, that's a really good thing. Because then you have box elder, aspen regeneration, soft maple. You might even have conifers on it that are scattered, but then you have high value wildlife value. And so we're not buying it to manage timber. I don't want to manage timber. Just like corn or ag, I'm buying it for hunting, purely. A lot of that stuff's easy to manipulate. I don't need a logger to come out then, and there's areas where you could probably have some logging done. It hasn't been a priority yet. But, and then no water. No water is actually a really good thing, because the deer don't live by drinking water every day. They drink water every 2-3 weeks. They don't need to they get all their moisture requirements from green vegetation that's growing. Water becomes more of a premium in December when water starts freezing up. But that means I can add water. So if I don't have water, I can add water, like we're adding this water hole down here, and that becomes a really hot target for them during the rut and when they're starting to move around in October. You'd think they'd hit it when it's hotter weather, but they actually hit it when it's colder weather, because that's when they're moving more, so they work up a thirst. We used to play hockey on the ice in lower Michigan, and we didn't play on rinks. We weren't in hockey leagues, and we'd play out on the ice. It'd be 10 degrees, and we'd be out there in t-shirts, and we were thirsty because you sweat, you work up a sweat. And bad thing down there is Gary Suter probably didn't have to worry about that wherever he's at, because he probably played in rinks and actually organized leagues. Yeah. But we'd have our puck, and we're playing over here in this little bay. It's a 200-acre lake, and someone would take a slap shot and it'd go the wrong direction, and we just watch our only puck that we're playing with just slowly disappear and ploop into the water that was still open out in the lake. So then we'd have to all stop. So that's about how that worked. We're always finding someone that had a hockey puck and then losing it. But they work up a thirst, running around. So end of October, November, it's just critical. And in December, if it's still open, they hit it hard. And so
looking at like the boundary lines and stuff hugging around, like, it seems like on some of the videos that you had shown, like some of the egg, looked like it was yours, but it's, ends up being neighbors or whatever. Like,
yeah.
You got a lot of just woods.
We got a lot of edge.
Fields. You got a lot of edge of it.
So we figure that around out of 245 acres, we probably have either early succession of growth or field edge. We probably have 50, 60, 70 acres. We'll have 12 to 15 acres of switchgrass. We'll have 16 and a half acres of food plots, and then we still have all this brush that's low value. So actual hardwood is really small, and we have a lot of cover, but we have a lot of space for open. So that's another thing too. I really like a high percentage of open ground, because that can all be converted. I mean, if I was going to buy 80 acres, an ideal 80 would be 50 acres of woods and mixed habitat, low value, and then 30 acres of ag that I can immediately convert into something special, immediate. Habitat improvements and what you're doing shouldn't take years to make. It takes one growing season to turn the hunt around. They didn't shoot very many bucks or very good bucks on the land we originally bought for 7 years that they owned it. And it was because of access, soybean only food plots that were down to the dirt by October 1st, parking their side-by-sides by the two rednecks they hunted during the season, and letting some of the nephews go down in the inner part of the woods. They weren't pressuring it that much, but they really didn't have much to work with. They didn't really plant plots that were season long. So we did the opposite of all that, established screening, good access, food. And to be honest, on the 178th original, by the time we got into fall and we're actually hunting, other than driving through with the real estate agent on about 2 roads, I hadn't seen about 150 acres of the property. Even though we bought it in June, we started turkey hunting in May, because it didn't matter. Because if we established all our foundation of food on the outside, that established the movement by the stands. We chose stands that we thought deer would move on during the hunting season, not where they were at during the summer. We established mock scrapes, locations for cameras, stand locations, food. That determined all our access, so I didn't really need to see the rest, because I didn't have time to manipulate it, work on it, and we didn't have the deer. So meaning that we just needed to take the deer herd we have, we wanted to take advantage of what was in the area and build on it. And then now we're more in building mode, where we want to work on, we've cut bedding areas on the inside, plant more switch, we have more water holes. Now we didn't have any water holes the first year, because although they're a great area, they're a great spot to hunt, water on the property isn't holding, that water is not holding more deer. So water is used as a definition of movement. And that's why we don't have water up there on the food plot. We have it down here, because now we can hunt that for a morning, evening hunt. We have good access. We can blow our scent here. We can blow it off the hillside over there too. And they're already coming to the food up there. So if we added water, we're already adding on attraction on top of attraction. It's a waste of a waterhole spot. We wouldn't have this waterhole spot down here really good. I mean, the deer can move through there, but they can move 20 yards down too, or 50 yards down. So, you know, not having water, having poor quality habitat, a good percentage of field and open area, those are all really key to buying. If you just looked at three things, buying property and you know, knowing it's in a good area. And if you have food, it kind of takes out your neighbors. And what I mean by that is, if you have a bad neighbor, well, you're not putting a food plot right on that border. You're putting cover. The food's going to go on the opposite side. So you can take a neighbor that, even if you think a bad neighbor is someone that's shooting everything that moves, well, if you put the food on the opposite side of the property and there's a quarter mile of cover and depth between you and that neighbor, then by the time you get back to the neighbor, in a daily movement, those mature bucks aren't moving more than 200 to 400 yards during the daylight, or they'd get killed pretty young, crossing borders. The more borders they cross, the shorter their life's going to be. And so you can set it up where they're focusing on just your daylight property. And so that's a concern too, like that depth of cover. If you have 5 acres in the middle of a 40-acre parcel, your depth is only 155 yards before you hit your border in all directions. You take that 20 acres, just a 20-acre parcel, put 5 acres on one side, now you have over 300 yards of depth. That 20 acres is worth more to me than that 50, because that 40 acres, because the 40 has to have the food in the middle. And you don't have depth then. Or I'd rather have it on the front side or on the side. So our whole property, it's like 3.1 miles of field edge. It's complemented with, it's probably, could be 3,000 yards of switchgrass. It's from that corner of the property over to the other corner, it's 1.2 miles, but it's all broken in between. So it gives us a lot of edge, and we're very fortunate to find it, but there's a lot of properties like that out here. That you have ag land that can quickly be converted. You have edge because it was old pasture. They let it regrow and establish. And then you have interior hardwoods. So then it comes down to, in here, like I said, the real estate listing wasn't real attractive because it was a bunch of summer velvet bucks. But once you found out that how they were hunting, how they're accessing, and the fact they were just planting 5 acres of beans and they were down to the dirt by October 1st, then I thought, wow, we could really have something, because we can take all those bucks during the summer and stick them on here during the fall. And we're doing that at a higher percentage from the neighbors' properties too, as the years progress too. So some bucks 2 years ago that we saw once or twice, we saw them all fall last year during daylight. So we're starting to hold some more of those 6-7-year-old bucks in the neighborhood, because they're finding that we're building a fall parcel, not a summer parcel.
When you were saying like the water holes and stuff, and like the corridors almost that they're moving through to go from bedding to food and stuff, do you enhance that with like trails like this and like bring a brush hog through and clear that up? And
it depends on the situation. If it's low quality brush, then just taking a brush hog through, mowing it down, or better yet, a DR brush trimmer, so it's only 28 inches wide or 30 inches wide, is great. Or down here we started cutting some hinge cuts, so that we want deer to be funneled into that water hole, not go low, not go high by the stand, and just bumper them in a little bit. But you can't do it too narrow either. And that's the thing, some people make too narrow, just they expect those big bucks to walk through this 2-foot corridor, and it's too constricting to them. So you have to make it somewhat inviting.
So you can walk through it without dodging your head. That's something that,
yeah, they don't want it. I've seen tunnels of deer corridors that were 200 yards long and the rub line's 10 feet on the outside, because what buck wants to stoop like this with its head down and go for 200 yards? You know, normally their head's up, they're looking around, they can catch the wind, and if they have this canopy over them, plus most of the time they're usually taking the canopy, the cover to make the canopy, and that means there's no cover on the sides. So you'll see out here where we hinge, we just push them straight away from the trail. You're letting more sunlight into that area just to thicken it up, because you see it's pretty open right here. We want it to be thicker down by the water hole.
Is that what this looked like, or was this all just kind of the smaller brush that was here?
It was more like this edge right here. It was more like this, where we had a little bit of brush edge. There's a bunch of logs out here and debris. Dante rolled a lot of those off. They're all around here. We had just random logs from them logging. They're just random rotten logs that they didn't take because they thought they'd do it next year, and then 10 years later they're just laying here rotting. Along with the trailer we took down up there, it was caving in, and just bags and bags of trash, old tarps. It was a mess. But anyways, let's go from here. And I really want to get in here. Like, I get excited about the habitat stuff as far as the switchgrass and the food plots, but I love the hunting strategy. That's where I came from, hunting background, just hunting a lot of public land, private land, all do it yourself. And so it was an easy transition back in 2005 to start a business. And I'd worked on habitat, my own habitat for 10 years at that point. But to say, you know, you create these habitat improvements with hunting purely in mind. You have to always ask yourself why. You're making this water hole here, why? How does it fit? And does it fit within your hunt? Why are you building this food plot here? Why are you putting the switchgrass here? Everything has a purpose. And it's all, to me, you know, how can you hunt the land even better? You know, we're adding switchgrass here for our access, all these switchgrass lines out here. How can you get on and off your property? Basically, I'd say like being a predator all the time, but it's so true. We have the ability to be the world's greatest predator, but we often don't. And often the more improvements you make, the harder it makes for you to do that. So this water hole is a really good fit down there. So we'll walk in there, kind of gather around. And the tower stand is going to be early bow season. Them coming in here, you obviously can't shoot this whole thing, but they're going right out there, back and forth every night. They don't go through here. They're going right back up there to hit the ag field. So pretty good movement back and forth. And we'll have a mock scrape under that shagbark hickory right there with a camera on it. And that'll be open to this brassica area. It'd be brassica, probably some buckwheat and some peas. So it's a little bit more of an all-season blend in this area. And then there's greens planted behind this corn, behind that flag down there. So we want the corn, we have switchgrass all there along the apple, around the apple trees, all switchgrass. They took out that trailer, it was a rollaway, it was all kinds of garbage. We'll have a little bit of screening in that lower edge of the platform up there, and then there's a lot of brush that will allow to grow in there. And like I've done in some of my redneck areas, is I've actually planted hybrid poplars and silky willows at the bases to fill in that space. So what I see in the future is we'll be cutting out lanes to shoot out of there in that location. But this is a unique spot because we'll have this totally closed off. We have switch all the way down. See the power lines back there? That's the back of our property going north. That's our line over to the right. You know, that's the ag fields. But we have switchgrass going all the way out to the power lines. And through there, you can see the burned out hunting plot over there through the trees. That's the hunting plot where Leo missed his buck, and we call it Leo's plot now. And we have the redneck over to the left side. So it makes it perfect for them coming through there, coming to this, and then going out that way. So we're just gonna hunt off the side. We can come in from behind a brush pile. We'll screen that off even further in the future years. We'll have a little bit of extra cover up around where the legs are. And with the cover that we have from this dirt patch back, that's gonna grow up, they'll look up from back here and just kind of see us, you know, see the bottom of our legs around in there. So we'll be pretty hidden coming in and out to that. And at the same time, really good gun season muzzleloader stands for covering the entire field if we want to. So this offers some strategy right here. This was basically just like that. All that growth that's around here, that's what we mowed down. I actually did not mow that down. I drove through it with my side-by-side spraying at the same time and drove over it. We drove over small trees and then just threw seed on the ground and had an incredible crop of brassica and a fall blend too in this area. So really good food source. And we didn't hunt this. We hunted over there. Dante in late season sat right over there in a red cedar where you could cover this field, but really it was largely unhunted. And you can see all the way across, we own over by the telephone poles over there as part of the 67. And we have a redneck all the way over there. And from there you could look across and see, like I'm sure Chris and Riley can see the redneck, but they look from over there and see deer on the food plot here while they were over there hunting. We have a 4.5 acre food plot over there. Yeah, it's this is a draw that goes down, and then we have it's a bigger field, but we cleared 4.5 acres for a food plot over there, and we have about 40 feet of switch wide all the way up and down the power line on that side too. So we have switch going to the power line here and then all the way over there too. But let's keep our questions down on this and we'll go out here. This is, like I said, this is 3-year-old switchgrass, and this is drilled in by Brandon. Brandon from First Choice Food Plots, raise your hand back there. And then we get all our seed from his buddy right next to him, John Comp. So between John and Brandon, we've spent a lot of time out here and then together too. But John's seed, and John, your switchgrass you had this, you had RC Big Rock, and then you had Tecumseh, and you had Cave and Rock. And what John tries to do is he gets some pretty high quality seed that doesn't have weeds in it, and it's hard to find. John will get a ton of seed in and have to turn it away, and he has people waiting that want to buy it. And but he doesn't want to have that reputation of selling bad seed. So, and then high germination rates, and it's hard to find that combination, and he's really good at it. Out here, this was a CRP mix, and so when we bought the property in 2020, sprayed. Brandon drilled the switch in a little bit later. Brandon was at probably more like mid-June. It was around mid-June to late June. Yeah, it was later. And so what that means is we did take care of the weeds out here, but by the time you spray, let it sit for a little while, we get some weeds coming in. It's drilled in and beautiful. We had really good germination rates. So we mowed this once in 2020. Last year we mowed it twice, and then we're just letting it go this year. And that's something I'll stress several times today. If you guys are, how many of you guys have the opportunity or have put in switchgrass or some type of CRP cover grasses? So a few of you. It's really important, whether it's CRP or grasses, that you effectively control your weeds. And that's the death of all switchgrass. It's the death of all food plots. And so whether you're using rotational smother crops like buckwheat for your food plots, or you're spraying, once you get it set, I did spray this field in simazine this year, but once this is set, we have switchgrass in Wisconsin that we haven't touched since 2015. So you can let it go for a long time. It's perennial. And what I like about it is we'll get cover that's higher than myself, and then it doesn't fall down during the winter. We have the Pollinator Blend you guys are standing on. And what I like about Pollinator Blends is they're a food source for many critters: birds, butterflies, bees, rabbits, pheasants, also deer. But I don't mix them. You know, I want this to be pure switchgrass. A lot of these broadleafs will just get choked out. The switchgrass is growing very aggressively. It'll do very well this year. I want pure switchgrass because that's pure cover, and then I want about 1/3 of the field, 1/4 of the field in Pollinator Blend. So, and I want to strip those. You can see this runs all the way down, and you see what I mowed yesterday all the way to the end. So there's switchgrass, there's food plot up on top. You see some of the leftover rye that needs to be sprayed. We have some erosion problems. That neighbors' ag fields were all planted right before 6 inches of rain. So we have erosion going through our property then, because it went through their fields under our property. They didn't do a bad thing. It was just the way it is. So we need to plant that area right there. And I forgot to ask John to bring some clover, and we'll probably throw like a highway mix on it or something. Just we want to hold that soil quickly. But that's over there. So you can see pollinator, switch, pollinator, and then we have switch right down here along this whole edge going from end to end on the property. This all, of course, we can have small game. We have a rabbit hut right down there. You can see some of the trees that were cut down in the past in the wintertime, but that rabbit hut is right there. And then for that, you can see a lot of these trees have been knocked down right behind you over in this direction. And then you can see where the hardwoods start. So we want that early successional growth. Before we bought the property, the deer could just stand in there in the open woods and look right out into the fields up to the driveway when we drove by. We want to eliminate that, because if they can do that, they don't feel comfortable staying right there. That's why we put the switchgrass on the border so that deer can't see up into this area. So we have these layers, and now we have food for all the critters. A lot of the CRP mixes, and you have to look at it like if you watch YouTube, I don't like the CRP mixes. I don't like a lot of the pheasant mixes. But the reason they do that is they're always looking for the latest, greatest mix, and they're planting with a machine, and they're planting big acreage. So typically they're not going to come in here and sculpt this and have a separate planting of each. They're going into one spot, they're planting 20 acres, and they're leaving. And so to me, there's no mix that's good unless it's pure grass. Now you get into southern Indiana, I've seen a beautiful blue stem field where it's still standing in the spring, but they got 16 inches of snow. So it's different down there, Missouri, Iowa. You can get away with some of the more grass mixes. Here, If we don't have switchgrass in the fields, and it can't be part of a mix, it's got to be pure switch, then we're not having a standing cover all winter long. And that's why a lot of these fields and properties around here, they have CRP mixes. There's been thousands of pheasants planted down the road here, and none of them survive because there's no standing cover. And you know how clean the ag fields are now with the clean farming practices. There's no more fence rows, there's no more cover. So to me, this cover is golden for pheasants, but then it's blocking it off so that deer can live right down there in the woods, and they can bed down there during the day, and they come up and hit our food plots, then they don't have to be spooked. And so we take this is a hollow right here, and you can't see it, but let's say this hardwoods is 150 yards across, 200 yards across, and then we have field edge on the backside, and then ag fields over there. So I want this switch to act like walls of a fort, and these layers of switch, and then the cuttings too, cuttings on the backside, more switch on the backside, more early successional growth like this, so that we can actually have deer live in this hollow instead of them living further down the hollow. So we're trying to maximize the efficiency of the parcel, make sure this is complemented by food on this side, and then from here to the nearest food, it's about 250 yards that way across the hollow and up the other side. So a big area of cover here. Again, we want to hold them right here, and we don't care if they end up across the fields at dark, after dark, they cross the road right here. It might be a little bit different if we had a 55-mile-an-hour blacktop road here. We don't have people sailing, we don't have a lot of neighbors even here, so we don't have that constant traffic. But even then, a lot of our food is long and lengthy along the road. We have screening along the road, so we're really not designing anything. Like, the worst thing I could do is put food plot right from the woods, go right up to the driveway, and you'd probably kill some deer even on this dirt road right here, because deer would cross back and forth all the time. It'd be an entrance from off the property and then an exit for deer on the property. So we want everything parallel to the borders like this, so when they come up here, they're turning right and left and following these lines, including the food. So kind of look at it like taking back to your own land. We have these layers of cover, layers of food and browse, but it's all meant to protect the outside of this woods. And this woods right here, we could say from the house and down and over, let's say it's 15 acres, you know, out of the 245 that's here. But we're trying to maximize that amount. And really, as far as hunting goes, we hunt that way. We have a water hole that's straight across from here, probably 200 yards. We come into the back side of all this, perfect for rutting. And then we leave all this alone. We have our neighbor's house right over here. So we might, I've thought about adding a blind right over there on the end where we could watch this whole movement coming in and out. That might be something we do in the future because it's easy to get in and out. But we're really allowing the deer to have this little corner, but we have really high quality hunting right there and right over here. And maybe we'll put something over on this side right here. But think about your own properties, whether it's even a woodlot. You have scattered woodlots where you can protect that outside first. And I always go back to my days in the Thumb area of Michigan, where I was hunting in the 80s, late 80s, in through the 90s. But we had a 5-acre woods. We call it the 5-acre woods, where we hunted. And we're walking a half mile to that woods along the fence row, and we're spooking deer through the 5, out the 10 acres, through the quarter-acre or the quarter mile of ag behind that, across the road, and across a half mile through the field, and we're only halfway to the 5-acre woods. The point is that you couldn't hold deer in any of these places because they weren't screened from the outside. So who cares what we did in the middle? We didn't do any bedding work back then. We didn't cutting. There was nothing in there to actually hold deer. But it wasn't a bedding area or holding area until we actually put that cover on the outside. Like there, it would have been perfect for switchgrass, even conifers, something where you could actually walk all the way to the woods with the right wind and get a look down in there and not spook the deer. So kind of from that, it really hammered home to me how important it is to have your edges screened. That could be a thin edging of hinge cuts, dropping timber parallel to your borders. You're walking in behind that. I had a client where they did some logging in Michigan this year in February, and they took a lot of that logging debris and basically made a wall around their property, and they walked behind the wall, and then they made cutouts that were at least 10 yards wide. They had made them too narrow is what I thought, but they made them about 10 yards wide now, and just making it easily for deer to walk in and out of the property. But it is so critical to establish that boundary on the outside and get that. So, you know, again, this 3rd-year switch, we're gonna let it go. You can see some of the old CRP mixes that were in here, some clovers, there's alfalfa in here too. And there's even little trees coming in here and there. And that's another reason. And with this switch, you can imagine when this erosion comes down, hits a switch, it just stops it immediately. Erosion is outstanding or switch is outstanding for erosion control. Now, let's open this up. You guys have questions. Don't be afraid to ask. More questions, the better. Sure.
So when you look at this and you sprayed it how long ago?
I sprayed it with simazine, which is a pre-emergent. It's meaning you're spraying it before all the greens are coming in. It's the same as atrazine that the farmer's using on the fields out here, except that's commercial grade. You have to have an applicator's license. Simazine is a pre-emergent, 3 quarts per acre, and that was sprayed probably, just guessing, it would have been mid-March, early March. And then things were green. We had a cold spring, and then all of a sudden it was 6 inches of rain and 93 degrees. So it just changed like that. In fact, I was a little worried because when we're establishing new switch, I want to get a good spraying of 2,4-D and Roundup. 2,4-D will kill young switch. Like if I sprayed 2,4-D on this and I got just double the rate, I'm going to injure a lot of the switch. It'll get brown spots, it gets limpy, doesn't grow anymore for that season. Trust me, I've made that mistake. And it's pretty easy to do when you're doing smaller ATV sprayers, UTV sprayers, you're doubling up on spray. And let alone if it's a new switch, you're going to kill it. And so, and it won't allow it to grow even. And so that, because it stays in the ground for about 2 to 3 weeks. So I was a little nervous this year because I let my weeds usually get up 8-10 inches and it was cold. And so I sprayed, and then all of a sudden I'm away on a client trip or a Michigan trip. We went and saw family, and it was within that time frame where we're getting that 6 inches of rain and more rain and 93 degrees and 80s, and the ground temperature changed fast. And so I was a little worried, but I just had a Michigan client trip for 8 clients over in Michigan, got back late Wednesday night, early Thursday morning, and we find switch everywhere out here. So it's kind of a leap of faith, of course, when you plant food plots and seed anyways. But when you're doing this stuff and frost seeding sometimes in January, like this Pollinator Blend was frost seeded in January, and then you're waiting months for it to pop. It's always so refreshing to see it. You know it's supposed to. Seen it many, many times over, seen it on client properties too, but it's nice to finally see it coming, and we've just seen that since I got back from Michigan on Thursday. Was the first time I saw it this year, the new stuff. So you got to be very careful with that 2,4-D. You know, if you have a question, just spray it with Roundup, but always plan on mowing too. And we'll talk about that. We've mowed some areas, we haven't mowed others, so that you guys can see some of those differences and why we want to mow, because as soon as those weeds start to shade out the switch, then it doesn't take long for it to die. After that young switch, you just have to baby it. And any of you guys have any more questions about it? Sure.
Is there a reason you drilled this instead of frost seeding it?
It was late, and so we didn't close on the property to June 5th. So in May, I planned tree stand spots based on where we thought they'd move in the fall. We put out mock scrapes, trail cameras. I started spraying at that time. We didn't want to invest all the money in switch, not knowing if things would go through or not. And you can imagine with being self-employed, it's just a pain getting lending, and everything was fine, but man, it just seemed like it took forever. But we closed June 5th, and then so Brandon came out and drilled, and that's what I recommend. If it's not to say I actually hand planted in an area that was food plot in the back. I broadcast at the same time Brandon was drilling, and that switch took off really well, but it was a food plot before the previous owners had. We couldn't make it around the property without walking through that 1.5 acre food plot. It was terrible for access, so we turned that into all switch. And that I was able to, it didn't have a lot of weeds in the spring. I sprayed it again, and then I sprayed Roundup when I actually planted, and that's been a very, very weed-free spot. But you can imagine the diversity that was in the CRP blend that was waiting to pop up again. So a little bit more, have to combat this a little bit more as opposed to a monoculture of some type of grass or weed, or especially a switchgrass, or a food plot planting, which is pretty easy. I think there's a question back there.
Sure. So you're kind of in the past, your strategy was to like be okay with dead space. Are you kind of trying to take advantage of that dead space now and like throw these pollinator strips in just to get, you know, small game habitat and stuff? Versus just letting things go?
Yeah, it's kind of, in an area like this, I could just let it go back to early successional growth. The one thing I like about the Pollinator Blend is that we can actually manage it in the future. We can manipulate it. I can put strips of switchgrass in it. I can replant it in pollinator. I can turn it into woods or shrubs. to me, the Pollinator Blend is the fastest way to get some type of food source in here for broadleaf for not only deer. They can actually pick at this Pollinator Blend. You can imagine if there's lots of clovers, alfalfa. They have different types of goldenrod, different bee balms that mature at different times. So there's lots of different cones. There's different milkweed. So there's a lot of different plants that are maturing at different times throughout the entire season. And so that's that food source area, kind of like if you just let it go. But early successional growth, it could all come in aspen. We have aspen coming in right there. We're going to keep it because it's by our yard, and we like hearing the leaves at night when it blows. But we can control what's coming in with something like that, and we don't have rootstock to deal with if we let it grow into trees and briars and everything else. Plus, I don't necessarily want, because it's solid switchgrass, we won't have a lot of deer bedding here out in the grass. They'll be right down in that hardwood regeneration edge where we have briars and hardwood regeneration. There's some acorns. That's where they'll bed during the daylight. And so part of this pollinator, if we let it go into shrubs and box elder, and aspen and everything else, we'll have deer bedding out here, which makes it harder if we want to access along this edge or even going up and down the driveway. I don't want deer bedded here at that time. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. Sure.
What would happen if you planted this, like you said, this switchgrass, say late June or July, and say you got a short rain, a half-inch rain, and then a drought? Will it kill the switchgrass?
The switch is very drought proof, and so it'll just slow it down. A lot of people think like it'll germinate at 58 degrees, 56 degrees soil temperature, similar to corn, but it has to have moisture to germinate, and it can't just have one rain. It needs to be damp for, John, it needs to be damp for 10 days, 2 weeks, the switchgrass seed. The good thing about switch, it'll sit there until it germinates, until next year.
So you can drill it about any time in the summer, is what you're telling me.
I wouldn't drill it later, because if it's young, you can get it frosted out of the ground when it gets into July, August. So I would say, like, I had really good success back in the corner end of June, but we had 10 inches of rain. We had huge rains in the forecast over the next 10 days, 2 weeks. We had warm temperatures, so that got it all up immediately. But the problem is, like, if you're covering it up a little bit, like if you drag it or something, then you're just exposing more weed seeds too. So you run that balance of, it's almost like, in that case, I had a food plot I was planting into. It was already controlled weeds were already controlled. And then I was taking that next step where I sprayed 3 times on top of that. The 3rd time being when I broadcast the switchgrass. We had rains in the forecast, good soil, not sandy soil. So there's a lot of things that, it's really site specific. It's so much, because there's a lot of people last year, they're wondering, I know John remembers because he gets all those calls, but why isn't my switch germinating? The soil temperature is 58 degrees, 60 degrees. Well, they've had drought for a month.
You were right on the first word, I got that.
Yeah. It's a little, yeah. I was envisioning talking to John and hearing the language that was coming out of his mouth. So, but anyways, but yeah, it's frustrating to people again, because it's that leap of faith, but it will germinate. But you have to keep the weeds off it, and so that's a big part too. Where I know, especially last year, I could think of areas that was drought for. It has to have moisture to germinate. So, and if it doesn't, it'll just sit there. But I think the late is bad, because it can heave that out of the soil.
What I was getting at is, like, so then if you waited till, you'd have to wait, like, say late June, then July, August, you don't want to plant, and then you could plant again in September for the following year.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. And so, like, what I look at, like around our area right here, I would recommend frost seeding September 15th or later. Okay. If you're in, let's say, north of the cities, over into central Michigan, maybe northern Pennsylvania, New York, I'd recommend more like Labor Day, after Labor Day, that you could put that on the ground. Bill Cretan's a client of mine I've been to about 5-6 times. He's right there in Michigan. And his date is Labor Day. That's when he puts his out every single year. He's putting his switch out if he's adding any. He did that for years around Labor Day, but he's about right there. As opposed to maybe even southern Michigan, it'd be safer to wait till mid-September.
Okay.
Do you prep your soil before you frost seed in September?
Yes, yeah, that's a good question. It depends on timing and how much soil is exposed. But if I have a choice, it's either a food plot space, or it's an area that I can spray down to take actual exposed soil and no weeds into the winter. And you're going to be a lot more successful. It's a lot, and you're going to be a lot more successful, because what I find is simply people don't don't follow through with the maintenance they need. So they need to mow it, because if the switchgrass was down here and this was other, foxtail or some other type of grass that's choking it out, it's okay to have that grass in there, but you have to mow it so the sunlight gets down to the top of the switch. Eventually the switch, when you get into August, it's kind of like it'll grow this much in June, this much in July, and it grows to this height in August. So it has that exponential growth. You want to cut right before that phase so that you can get the weeds down. And sometimes you have to cut before that, just to make sure that young switch isn't getting choked out. We have an area over here that's briars and goldenrod. And I started that by just taking a briar patch, kind of like the edge you see down there. I mowed it down with a brush hog this year, sprayed simazine on it, then hit it with 2,4-D and Roundup, broadcast my seed, and I have switchgrass growing everywhere, but I have to take care of those briars that are coming back up, and the goldenrod, everything else. It'll just be a couple years of mowing and then it'll be fine. And I'm obviously going to do that, but I find a lot of people don't. And then they wonder, and if you don't and it doesn't grow, the best thing you do is call John and complain about it. So, no, seriously, if you don't baby it and take care of it, the good thing is you can let it go. It'll last for decades. It literally, I've seen fields that are 10 years old that were put in with chemicals, they're put in clean, and they're still standing and they're still 95% switch. It chokes out everything else. But at the same time, it can be choked out when it's young. And so you really have to take care of it. And if you don't, of course, I don't know if John would say it like this, but you have no one else to blame but yourself if you don't take care of it. And that's where we had almost switchgrass shortages this year. And I talked about online kind of like, man, I feel so bad because the switch is like golden, and there's shortages because everyone's going out and buying it. And they had drought, fire out west, so it destroyed. There's a lot of different ways that switchgrass seed was destroyed last year. And then a large percentage of people buying it are just going to destroy it. And I know John feels that way too. It's kind of like, if he knows you're just going to destroy that seed and not take care of it, he'd rather not sell it to you. I mean, he'll tell people, it's kind of like, I joked with a client this week, they were talking about you, that, about, it's almost like John feels like those switchgrass seeds are his little kids, he's sending them out the door, he wants you to take care of them and not destroy them. And so he spent, it really is.
Not cheap to plant, it's not easy to plant. We've talked to a lot of people that have bought from us, and like you said, maybe they just went out and bought it, kind of like the COVID toilet paper thing. They bought switchgrass, not prepared to plant it, so we talked them into just the switch will hold its germ, plant it November, October, prep it July, August, September, plant it in the fall. Because it's once you start to plant the switchgrass and you get into that weed situation, it's a battle. And if you don't have patience, it's just, you could spend a couple $100 or even thousands of dollars, and the next thing you know, you're running a tiller through it and putting food in or something because that's what it doesn't grow. You have to have patience with switchgrass. You really do. It'll be there next year. You just have to control the weeds. And while we're mentioning it right down there, we have that little cast of characters there. John, Brandon, and Jack. Jack might be the biggest character of them all, but he's the owner of Family Tradition Tree Stand. So we have a pretty cool little crew down there. But if you guys have a chance to talk to those guys later on in the event, they'd love to speak with you, including Chris over there and some of the other guests that are up there. But any other questions?
Are you still mostly cave and rock, or are you trying something like the RC Big Rock?
This is cave and rock. John could correct me, but I believe I planted 34 pounds of RC Big Rock this year and 5 pounds of cave and rock. Yeah. Yep. Your Big Rock's all over here, right? There's some back there. It's everywhere. I ended up putting, I think it was 2,200 yards of switch between 12 and 36 feet wide here and in Wisconsin this year. So all hand seeded and planted, simazine, Roundup 2,4-D. So we had a lot of length. We were either reinforcing areas or we took out new areas by grinding down. We'll see that later today in the walk, some brand new areas that we've just simply, and we'll show you what switch looks like and what's coming in, how it relates to our deer strategy. Because whether it's you're creating hinge cuts on the outside of woods, you're putting in conifers on your land, switchgrass, there's always something that's the best fit for making sure it's screened and allowing you to get on and off your property better, or making the deer feel more comfortable. So like right here, by putting all this here, we've invited the deer that we're bedding back there a couple hundred yards all the way up into this hollow. And that helps that space be taken over by bucks, more deer. It's just more successfully aligning them around the property as it relates to our food and outside exterior cover. Sure. Oh yeah, Gary.
So all the weeds out here are gonna die out just from the growth of the...
Yeah, and if they don't, I'll hit them with simazine again next year. And if I do mow this, it'd be in May when this switch is, I could even mow right now. but it'd be probably by the end of May where the weeds are still appreciable. We had one field over here where we had a big broadleaf weed coming in. It actually was already over the switch by 7-8 inches, 2-year-old switch. And we mowed it about 3 weeks ago. And when we came back from Canada fishing, all the switch was 7-8 inches higher than the broadleaf. But if we wouldn't have mowed, it would have been dead by July, middle of July. So here we're not in that case. You know, you see all this switch, it's higher than, I mean, almost every weed in here, it's higher than.
So there's hope for my switch.
There is, Gary. Yeah, there is. Yeah, down by, but that was interesting on yours because you're talking about down in Blue Mounds, down by Madison. Gary had a screening area and he had switch planted, and you could see like 2 feet in the shaded area where the switch isn't growing. And then right outside of that, I put that in the video with Gary standing there, but he had screening blend, and then he had which I think he used John's this year. And it was really thick, and then you had about 2-3 foot gap where the shade was hitting it on the north facing side where it didn't grow. But other than that, I thought it looked good.
Yeah. So I just planted new switch this year. I got 2 sprayings in, got nervous about the 2,4-D, so the third one I just did Roundup.
Yeah.
So how many years do you do the simazine? So like this is your 3rd year, you're gonna let it go. So next year in February, March, probably March, you simazine it again.
If I'm happy with how the switch looks the end of the summer into the fall, I will not simazine next year.
So once you start getting this look in the spring?
Yeah, and it's starting to stay above it. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. Once I know that switch is outpacing the weeds that are in there, then just let it go. So and that could be dependent on your weed type too. Well, we're here out on our 2022 Camp Kicking Bear Habitat charity event, and we're getting into more of the meat and potatoes of hunting strategy and questions, and we happen to have the whole gallery here of people that are in the habitat, walk and talk, seeing certain features. One of the features I couldn't wait to show people was this giant water hole setup. This is a 300-gallon setup. I think someone might have a question on overall size too, but we have about 5 questions from people in the group, and what I like about that is typically where we're coming up with our videos is when you guys have comments on YouTube, when I'm out on client properties, I have a list of about 11 or 12 videos right here just from my last client trip in Michigan, let alone YouTube comments. Then what you guys are asking is what we make videos of, because we'll look at like, you know, that's a good question. I've never heard that asked that way. And you'd think that water holes, you'd have 2 or 3 videos and you're done, but they're all those slices of pie we're trying to hit, so you guys understand water holes more out there, so the group here understands more, and we've probably created 40, 50 water holes. I know even mock scrapes alone, we have over 50 mock scrape videos in a playlist. So this water hole they're a dynamic setup. I shot my deer, my buck in Minnesota over a water hole last year. I shot my buck in Wisconsin over a water hole last year. Some of my largest bucks have been relating to a water hole over the years. So I think it's pretty cool we have this group here. I think they're going to ask questions that you guys want to hear out there, and I think Gunner is going to follow around and find people with questions. So let's start out with number 1. Let's right here. So what's your question?
Placing the water hole, would you put it in line with a spring where there's always fresh water running in it, or do you want rainwater just to fill it naturally?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And so the question is, if you guys can't hear out there, just if you have a spring, are you putting a water hole in? Would you add a water hole because you have a spring?
Or have the spring running into the water hole to fill it,
sure,
and then let it have a constant fresh water supply, or do you want it rainwater filled?
Yeah, so is it rainwater filled, spring filled? And just a real quick comment, you're from northern Minnesota, right? Oh, yeah. With your accent. Yeah.
Middle Tennessee.
Middle Tennessee. Yeah. So we have, you came out for the Habitat Day from Tennessee, and then I know someone came from Indiana. Any other long distance travelers to get to the, yes, Ben right there is from at least 35 minutes away. Yes, good job, Ben. Winona, yeah. So we have a lot of close ones, but I know we had someone come from New Jersey last year that flew in, so we have people come from all over. I really appreciate you guys coming. That being said, what you have to be really careful with when you have natural water holes or water sources is they tend to be seasonal in nature, meaning they have a lot stronger flowage at sometimes. For example, springtime, a spring might be really moving a small creek or a seepage out of the hill. And not that it wouldn't offer water the entire year, but instead what you're worried about is that it gets washed out. So I've seen a lot of people take a tub, they bury it in an area where they expect to have it filled by a spring. The spring unleashes in the spring or with a fall rain, and it just blows the whole water hole out. Whereas if it was just natural coming down, it wouldn't have done that. Or you're taking and building an area, you're going down a little bit further, finding a flat spot, digging a depression in there so it could flow through more naturally, but it's collecting water in a spot. This is a case right here where this water hole in particular, we want to catch rainwater. And the thing about rainwater is it's not going to blow out the water hole. And you can see where we had the excavator make this, it's up a little bit too high for that. So we're having him come back. I was on my client trip when he was out here and he made it look really pretty, but we want that down about 2 feet because I want that to be about on level all the way around here, and then we'll collect that rainwater. Collecting rainwater to me is more, it's more of a slow trickle, it's natural, but at the same time, we've had times where 3 years in a row we didn't have to add water. Last year I added water 3 times just during the hunting season because it was so dry during our hunting season. So this is actually cut out so that we can actually back our side-by-side in with the water hole on or water tank on the back and fill it up. So something very important to consider. So someone else with another question on water holes. Sure.
When you go to fill up your water hole during the hunting season, do you come at night? Do you come in the morning? What time of day would you get out here to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Boy, I get that a lot, and to me the best time to fill it is when we're not hunting that spot the next day, in the next few days. And so I take that into consideration. We might be going away for a trip for a week. I might be going to see family. We might be going on a fishing trip or something. So I'll take that time before then. But we've had water that we've filled in, Dylan. Yep. It was in 2016. We had one of our tubs back then. It showed me coming in with the trailer with a water tank on it, backing up, filling it with water. And then the next day, I think it was the next day, we had about a 4-year-old buck coming in. And that was, let's say, October 26th. And the cool thing about that, it was about 40 degrees, first time we ever saw that buck. And so we're filling them a lot of times in that sweet spot of what would be traditional October lull, where unless we're hunting evening food sources, we're really not hunting much at all because we're waiting for our good cruising areas or good morning stands. And so that's something too. We might fill this water hole, but we're going to be hunting the evening food plot, hunting plot 400 yards that way. And so we're not really spooking out this spot. So we're planning accordingly with our hunts and trying to fit it in. But bottom line is the machine, we leave the machine running. I think them hearing a machine is a lot different than hearing voices. And so we're keeping our voices low. We're coming in here, filling this and getting out of here. And if we happen to disturb something for a little while, that's better than letting it run out, because once it runs out and they establish a pattern of use of hitting this water, and that's the reason they were coming through here for some reason. We're trying to add a lot of other reasons they're here, but then it takes a while for them to get water in here and reestablish that pattern, 2-3 weeks. So I think the risk of letting it run out outweighs the risk of coming in here and spooking a deer as far as, spooking a deer is concerned. So, yeah, sure, Ben.
Question. I noticed that you have a log that's laying in there. This question is kind of more about water quality, I guess. Do you find that there's any difference between like muddy water or fresh water that you might have just filled it, and does it matter?
It seems like the dirtier, the stinkier, the better, unless it's something rotting and dying in it, which is why we have the critter stick in there so that any small rodents that get in there can get out. If you don't do that within a month of your water hole, you will find a dead squirrel, dead chipmunk, something dead in there. And then not only is the thing dead and you feel bad, but then at the same time, you should probably take 5-gallon buckets of water, remove at least 90% of the water, and then refill it up right away so that you can dilute that rottenness that's in there. But when it's rotting, decaying leaves, sticks, we actually add soil to the bottom. You guys can see it's kind of a muddy layer right there, but we'll add a lot more soil. And with 300 gallons, this happens to be a lot larger size. We can put 6 inches of soil on the bottom and to make it taste a little bit more natural, like a mud puddle. In the spring, you come in here with a garden rake, get some of the leaves out, the leaves especially, and sticks, debris. We have a spot in Coon Valley where it drops walnuts into it. So we get those walnuts out so it doesn't turn it blackish, ugly water. But it seems like warm and muddy is a lot better than cold and clear. Yeah, buck stew. Yeah.
So, talking about the contraptions and stuff, I had a friend that was talking about it. Have you experimented with any like pumps or heat coils or anything like that, or like doing solar, like using trail cam solar stuff to?
I haven't. I haven't done so. They have some pretty cool pump setups out there, and I worry about it being right around here, and actually the pump's right here. I have someone that solar powered Adam. Did you tell me about that? I don't know if Adam's out here.
This Adam?
Yeah, did you tell me about someone that had a pump going to a water hole? And
someone just had a bird bath or something in their yard that every year they would stick a heater in the winter and bucks would come and drink and drop their sheds in their yard.
Yeah, just because it was a one water source during the winter time.
Yeah.
Like northern Minnesota, a lot of the times, like your other videos, you talk about the deer coming in, hitting it during rut and stuff when they're working up that thirst, but by the time they're doing that and rutting and stuff up there, it's frozen.
Yeah.
The water hole, we do a lot of work to dig them in and stuff in the back areas,
and then during the rut, they're all frozen in. I would definitely try something in that case. I would start freezing sometime typically in November, and then they'll melt a little bit in early December, and then freeze back up again. But I would say between November and December, they might be available half the time.
Do you ever like chip them out or anything?
No. You know, it's interesting. They'll still come for a week or two and hit it, and it's establishing that pattern of use. But again, yeah, if they come here a few times and it's not there, they'll find something else. But we're trying to keep it within the same movement. And it's interesting, when we have a mock scrape here, overall during the hunting season, they hit the mock scrape more than the water hole. So a lot more resources spent putting the water hole in, when the mock scrape is almost more important than the water hole. And kind of get back to your question too about mock scrape distance from a water hole. As long as you can shoot to both of them, that's the main thing. We like to line them up so that we can get a camera on this and that, because it's interesting to see how many bucks will come in the mock scrape and just come passing through and they don't even stop at the water, or vice versa. They'll hit one or the other. But we've said there's a real premium on the mock scrapes in September, early to mid-October, all of December, and then in November they might switch over to where they're really end of October hitting the water hole at a higher percentage of time.
I guess in conjunction with the water hole, staying on that same topic with the mock scrape, is there a certain amount of distance that you want around the mock scrape so they can kind of work it?
Yeah, this right here is about as close as I want to make it. Between these two trees, they can obviously move around quite a bit, but this is even starting to get close. I would guess this is 7-8 feet. And so this is getting too close because there's not enough room to get around. And especially if this was a big shrub here with a tree, and this is a big shrub here with a tree, I think it's too confining. This is right out in the open. We could even do it between where Gary's at and right over here on the shagbark. That's a little bit wider space. And so then I'm determining what lines up best with camera location. We had a camera location right back there. Or no, it was on that poplar right back there. There's another question up here for sure.
Last year, I'm over on the eastern side of Wisconsin, and we had record dry year last year. The property that I have typically has water on it, really a lot of water in the spring, and then we usually get a really wet fall and I'll get water. Would it make sense to put a water hole in just in case you have another really dry year, or is it really not worth it?
I think if it's within your movement, it's not going to hurt anything. If you can see, we also put this water hole off to the side of the trail. I put the mock scrape right in the middle of the trail. I put the water hole off to the side. I want them hitting their head on the mock scrape when they walk through. I don't want them stepping inside the water or having to go around it every time they come in. But the one thing to consider is, let's say we had huge water out towards our other food plots over there, and deer were coming from this bedding area through, and there's tons of water over here. Great place for a water hole still, because they're sitting dry all day. They're on the way to the food in the evening, and they'll hit the water. Let alone if a buck's cruising through here, circling back, not making it all the way to the food or water over in that direction. So if they're bedded dry and they're heading towards food and it's dry on the way, always is a good spot for a water hole. So I hope that makes sense.
One question I had, I've seen some of your videos in the past where kind of the water level is low in the water hole. and you see them adjusting and adjusting and trying to struggle to get down to that water.
Yeah.
What's a good height that you should kind of not let your water go below where they kind of really struggle to get at that water?
So what we're finding with the 150 gallon tanks and larger, you know, they'll step right in there. So we've had 150 gallons, they'll step right in and get to it. Okay. And if you have a lip like this, it's hard for them to step over and get into it. So I want to get that flatter down, you know, down in a flatter position. But yeah, that's always a concern. We find if it's a small hole, obviously with a big buck, it's really hard to get his head down there. You know, even if that was 6-7 inches from the bottom, it wouldn't bother me at all. Just having water there would be important. They'll get down to it. We've had them get down on their knees, and they'll get down. They step inside it. One thing I just remembered too, you can see all the soil around here, exposed soil. Obviously redoing this, so I didn't want to go buy a shady trail mix or something that we could put grass seed on and clover. But I like to put green on this just to hold the soil and you know, avoid erosion around that water hole. And I think that's really important. So we always add that right away after it's constructed and made. And it's not for a food source, it's just to hold the soil. Also, when it comes to EHD, deer die, they get the EHD midge. That midge lives and is propagated with the drying and cracking mud around a traditional water hole. With grass around here, and because the water is not coming over the top, you know, into this area, we're not going to have drying and cracking mud like a traditional water hole that's receding. So I haven't heard of any reason that a water hole would be unsafe as it relates to deer dying or any kind of disease transmission, any different than them hitting a mock scrape or hitting the same rub or eating in the same location would. And to me, a tank makes a lot more sense when it comes to water holes, at least as far as it's concerned spreading EHD, just because you don't have that drying, cracking, receding mud going back into this. I often point that out, and I wanted to make sure that people knew that this will be seeded after this is adjusted. And we usually use a cover crop of rye, oats. I'll actually come in here with the brush hog or mower deck and mow around this and mow it when it comes in, kill the rye out, oats, whatever we use for overseeding. So, and you can see, like, we'll come in from the side here to drive in and fill this, but I hinged up there on the upper side so that when we're looking down here, I don't want deer up to my tree stand. And so I'd rather look over brush and shoot down in here and not have to worry about deer, you know, walking all the way over to smell where I climbed up. Now, when we come in to climb up, we're just coming in and stepping as high as we can and reaching, and we're going up, because that fingerprint and that scent stays there for a very, very long time, hours and hours, if you're actually handling it. So we're actually not changing at the base of the tree. We're not doing anything other than come in and climb up, and if we have any adjustments to make with our clothing, it's up in the stand. And we're actually lifelined in before we even ever step off the ground. So I don't want to linger around there and change for 5 minutes. That's not my style of hunting, and leaving a big scent pad there that a mature buck could smell and never come back by this spot because he smelled that, or never, meaning for 2 or 3 months or during hunting season.
Do you come in the way we came in, or do you come in from above?
I come in, I'll come in right up there, right to the back of the tree, like at an angle through here, and expose myself as little as possible. Like, I wouldn't want to come in through the edge of switchgrass where we drive through to get in here, because then I'm exposing myself to movement down here. But somewhere up here where I can just drop straight down to the stand location and expose myself as little as possible to the sides in the slope.
One more question about this spot specifically. Okay, so in the past you've had a bunch of videos talking about using hill country to use thermals to cheat the wind. Does any of that apply here, since you're looking pretty far down, or is a like cardinal direction bad wind, you know, back this way? Would you count on that swirling up? Or is that just too much into the heart of your property for you?
It drops off really significantly just right there. You can barely see it through there. So, and it's dropping off right down here too. So I'm going to send my scent straight from behind me so that it wraps around in my face from up high. So with us being towards the top of the ridge, we'll get really good lift, thermal lift coming up here in the morning. And then, and that's what I was talking about. We have to use the thermals to our advantage in the morning like that. We can blow our scent up there, but in the evening, we have to make sure we have a strong enough wind so the thermals don't pull our scent down into the movement over here. Okay. And you can see with this water hole, there's an option of trails down a little bit lower. We don't want them up by us. They going a V right here. There's a really nice trail to the right over there, or straight in front of me. That goes right up to the corner of the food plot up there. So we want to keep everything on this side. And so I might cut down a couple other trees just to be kind of steer them in a thoughtful approach. I don't like, in this area we don't, if it was northern Ohio and there's not a lot of cover, you can compartmentalize deer and make them have very small little travel corridors. Here it's more of a thoughtful suggestion. You have a little bit of a hinge cut here, a hinge cut here, just to keep it growing. So, are there any other water hole related questions? Yeah, sure.
Most of the water holes we've done on our farm, we have a lot of problems with having like mosquito larvae and stuff like that that's always in there. Is there any way or any treatments you've used to eliminate that issue?
I haven't even worried about it. It seems more natural, just like every water hole out in the woods will have mosquito larvae in it. So keeping with that natural, I think they expect it's natural over there. There's mosquito larvae. It's whatever smell they like with that water hole, they can associate with this water hole too. And I think that's the same, just a little bit off topic, but with your food plots. That's why I like all my food plots the same. You have the same combinations of green. So if they get imprinted in their head that your food plots are safe and they're not being as pressured as your neighbor probably doesn't have the same food plot seed blends. And a lot of times has them scattered around. And so I think that they get impressioned on noise, scent, sound, sight. So if they come into a nice smelling food plot that they enjoy, I mean, going to that other one in the area, I think that's a way to keep them calm and low stress on your property. And it's important to have all your food plots be the same anyways, or most of them. But that's another big factor is I think you're giving the deer a good impression that smell is a good smell. That taste is a good taste, whatever it might be.
So it's a pass-through of
Yeah.
the trails going to and from. On average, like how long does a buck hang out at a water?
That's the beauty of a water hole. The beauty of a water hole is that they're here for a minute, stop, 2 minutes, unless it's a social thing where a big one's coming in, an older one, and he's messing with a small one. We saw that last year. But unless it's social or something taking place like that where he's spending time making a mock scrape too, it's literally a minute. And so it's the beauty of that is, let's say this was a nice little hunting plot, much less risk coming into a small water hole spot where it's just a pass-through as opposed to something they might stop at for 20 minutes. So your exposure getting in and out is greater to the deer. So I really like that they can just one-stop shop. They come in here and they're moving on. So really cool. Let's wrap this up. So I appreciate you guys watching this video and some of the input and discussion that we have here. It's been a really worthwhile event. And if I know you obviously couldn't make it this year, but hopefully you can make it next year because it's for a great cause, and that's the bottom line. So hopefully you enjoyed these questions. And so this is going to be our last stop in the tour, and we'll head out after this to the vehicles. And Dante, you like this spot, right? Kinda? Yeah, half and half. He had a good opportunity here. That water hole right there, I don't want a water hole back there because we already have great bedding movement here. We don't need that water hole. It's too close to the other one. The other one is a completely separate stand that we can use morning, evenings, get a lot more use out of it generally for the entire season. So I'd rather have that water there. We're taking this one out. This is a 100 gallon. It's 24 inches deep, where that 300 gallon is 300 and it's 25 inches deep. Even the 150 is only 25 inches deep. So the 100 gallon is small. We use a 110 sometimes from TSC, and those are 22 inches and you get 10 gallons more. So they're a lot bigger mouth. So those I really don't care for too much. We're gonna take that out, fill it in. But this entire area where you guys just walked on was all switch. Coming in here, you just walked on all that switchgrass. And we're hinging off to the sides, especially on this side, on the south facing, to allow more sunlight to come into here. That increases regeneration, increases food value. And you can see the mount on the tree back there. I think there's still a mount for the trail camera. We'll add probably not too long from now, in the next week or two, now that we're getting caught up with everything. But we'll add a camera there right on that mock scrape. We'll keep that open because we want to mock scrape at every stand location. And do all of you see the stand? Yep. It's right over here. That's that stand we come straight up to from the bottom. The cool thing is it's more through pure red cedar and mix, but they're not bedding in that red cedar necessarily. They're more up in these edges up in here. But you can see from here, when we blow our scent off of this, it doesn't matter what we smell like. It's blown off. It's not going to hit deer down below in the morning. In fact, as the temperatures are rising all the way till 2, 3, 4 in the afternoon, nothing's going to pick us up anywhere. Also, we don't have a lot of movement down in that pure switchgrass. Most of the movement's up here and going back. We get movement around this top side right here in front of the stand, right to your right and straight in front of me over there through the white oaks. But we don't get as much down there. So we found in the evening, it's been a pretty safe place to blow your scent. Dante, did you have deer maybe once or twice wind you down there, or any at all? No. The Dante sat there, I don't know, a handful of times. We have a buck we nicknamed Stripe now after Dante's encounter. So you can imagine what happened. But it was a little high. So not funny for the buck, but there's no blood, took some hair, and I imagine it's all healed up now as far as its hair being gone. But bottom line is, we know with that buck, it's a nice little 8-point, and it'll be a nice buck this year. So maybe get another chance, redemption. But this, to me, we had thought about putting food through here. We obviously have the water hole. We didn't get to hunt the water that much, or this spot, because it's more of a pure bedding rut spot. And we got some chance to hunt here in the afternoon, evening. We'd come right through the top. But with the food plot there being more appreciable, more corn, getting rid of the trailer, and then making bedding here, I thought the bedding value back on this point and sticking deer 100 yards that way, 150, or off this edge or that edge, was more important than just making this a water hole rut stand. I'd rather get the water out. That creates a better stand over there, balances out our stands, and this still is an incredible morning hunt. We won't evening hunt here, but morning hunt, we would hunt. And then I like the idea, the option of going straight down to the trail and access coming out, because we don't have a lot of deer bedding down in this location. They're off the points here, up top here on the sides. They're down in this hollow a lot. So that comes in with getting to know your deer herd a little bit. There's really not much for them down there. It's not that we don't have a lot of regeneration until you get towards the bottom. So if we want to get out there at 10, 11 o'clock, we know there's no deer below us. We can just get down, get out of here. And I don't think we're going to be able to go through here anymore, just because we're going to have deer bedded right up on top. So the switchgrass, we can come back here and mow it easily. There's a lot of switchgrass, if you guys notice, coming up in here. And that's different too. It seems like it takes, when there's woody debris that you're frost seeding the switch into, it takes a little bit longer for it to pop up. I think the wood soaks up some of the water, and it just doesn't get that germination moisture that you need quickly. Where when it's out in the soil here, you get a lot better germination of it growing up. You can pick out a lot more pieces of switch coming in. In fact, there wasn't a lot on this end. We were wondering why, but they've all popped in just in the last few days, couple days. So moist enough, and I bet you there'll be a lot popping in the next week. So, but we can mow this, maintain it, but we'll get the water hole out of here, turn it into pure bedding. And with the thermals here, it goes down in that point. So I wouldn't feel bad about blowing my scent that way, that, all the way down here. So we get a lot of different winds. I wouldn't blow it right here because we're almost at level. So in the morning, it's just going to go right up into there. But blowing it across this end and all the way off, we get a lot of different wind direction we can hunt back here. And that's all our, that way is northwest, northwest wind there. So we're getting northwest winds we can hunt this with, west winds, southwest winds. We get a huge amount of wind that we can potentially hunt in this area, where something easterly, southeasterly burns us up on this top. So this is how I like hunting bedding. We could have a buck that's literally bedding anywhere up here. I really don't care that we're that close to them coming in. I don't want to sit up on top and get right in the middle just because it's too risky. But coming right here at the end of the bedding and having a mock scrape here, there's a natural movement down the trail right over there. And it's just an X of movement is what we saw. So most of the mature bucks that we had last year, including Venti that got shot on the second day of gun season, I think it was, or opening day, about a mile that way. Our of course, Minnesota is in the rut with gun season, so that doesn't help matters for a buck like that you might want to let save. But he was here. There were a lot of our nicest bucks were here in this location on that scrape. So look forward to getting the camera back for one thing, but look forward to allowing this to come back up. And this is a spot we expect to shoot a big buck. We can slip in, pass the water hole, get into the spot, and we can have deer come in from the corn here, the neighbor's ag field. We've added a lot more pieces up there to make it attractive for deer coming out to this point in the first place. So, guys have any questions? Oh, sure.
So With that area being coming up and down in that stand with the access, and the deer typically not bedding in the switchgrass itself, the concept of having the switchgrass all the way up through this trail, just curious.
It makes a really good thermal barrier.
Okay.
Where the deer they could bed on this side or they can bed on that side, and it's taking the wind that would have otherwise been sweeping over this top and then protecting them where they would naturally bed, which is just off to the side.
Okay.
I've seen bedding area creations like this right here where they've made hinge cuts and hinge cut bedding areas with canopy all the way down the top. And then that deer that's sitting here in northwest wind is just completely exposed to the wind and vulnerable. So we'd see a switchgrass or a hinge cut top all the way along this where there's canopy, and the deer bedding 30 yards down that way. They're not relating to that at all because they took all the cover, put it up high, and now a deer in here can see 200 yards in any direction when the leaves are down. So no protection.
Left and right of this point?
Not right here, but we do just walking down.
Walking in, okay.
Yeah, and then we get into a lot of mixed aspen regeneration, birch, and a little bit of red cedar on this side. So pretty good habitat. And my goal right here with these first cuts was to allow a lot of sunlight coming in from the southerly exposure to get into the switchgrass growth back here. So,
just kind of riffing off her question, what percentage of the work you do is adding features or doing things based on what the deer are naturally doing already versus trying to make the deer adjust somewhat to maybe what you think is a better pattern for the hunt?
almost all of them, except adding food sources that create new patterns. So sometimes they're not going into this nice piece of habitat along this bench or crossing across this saddle, but it's because there's no food source. And that goes back to, if we didn't have any food on this property over here, the 67, then we can't count on deer consistently bedding over there on that point, let alone, because there's a big point right there, and then there's this one right here. And with those being both sufficiently supported with food, now we throw deer back here on a daily basis so that a buck that's bedded down there, he could bed there, hit that food on the way out to ag every single day if he wants. We control a higher percentage of his daylight patterns throughout the entire season because we have the food here. If we didn't have the food, he might not even ever be here. So we're looking at, I'm trying to, every time you look at a property, and that's why I love hills so much, because you're always trying to look at those hills, and hills define where deer move, and then how can you build your habitat improvements off that to make sure that they're going to be effective when you actually hunt them and use it. So you're really trying to either match existing conditions or those future natural movements that just aren't there yet because of food. And there's nothing else you're gonna do. You can create a bedding area, but if you don't have the food, then, and I'll add this about bedding areas really quick. This is something that I failed to mention enough, I think, is that everyone talks about a sanctuary being their bedding areas and where they're hanging out during the day. But a sanctuary, if they're not hitting that food source during daylight and they don't feel comfortable and you're over hunting it and you're treating that like it's not a sanctuary like most people do with food plots, they're over hunting, they're sticking a blind out in the middle, they're spooking deer when they get on, off, deer aren't gonna be back in this bedding area. Or they're gonna be does and fawns and there's no room for bucks because they would be pushed way back there and there's no room, it goes down to a steep gorge. So to treat the food plot as a sanctuary is far more important than treating the bedding area as a sanctuary and even bedding area work. And so that's why we focus when you first come to the properties on food source location, where it's safe, we don't spook it, and then where we think we can hunt between those food sources or off the back side of them for morning, for cruising movements, where we think we can hunt near the food, whether it would be with a bow or gun safely, and then mock scrapes to support those stand locations at just stand locations, and then cameras at each one of those. So we're finding this is the mock scrape, this is where it's gonna go, this is the tree that we're gonna put a camera on, and then this is where we're gonna hang our stand, all three of those together. So really back here, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, we can enhance this, we can make it better, but without the food out there and the patterns that we're using for access in the stand location, this means nothing. And so if we happen to come back here and spook a buck, we got pictures of a lot of different bucks in here during bow season, during the rut last year, and throughout the year. So if we spook one single buck out here, a lot of times you walk in, you always have that picture, we've all been there, where you're hunting a certain buck and you walk in and you spook a deer, you think that was him, it had to be him. Well, there might have been 30 other bucks in that area at one point or another, so the odds are it wasn't, but even if it was, to me, what I find is good habitat improvements where you have outside ag for destination fields after dark, then you have a holding plot that's 1.25 acres size, and then you have bedding area, and you have this movement that's 250 yards long, then deer want that condition. You have does bed up here, bucks are bedding back here, and so another buck a lot of times just slots in. So really important to remember that with the food plots, that unless you can get by them without spooking deer, they're useless. And unless you can hunt them without spooking, if you're constantly spooking deer getting in and out of a box blind, then get rid of the box blind, move the location, shorten the food, get rid of the food, shrink the food. It's just a black and white thing. So when I look at client properties, it's purely black and white. If you're going to spook deer there and you're setting yourself up, then why bother? You're destroying the whole land. And so like here, we have 67 acres. If we're spooking deer right there, it's going to have a negative effect on that food plot over there that's, you know, a quarter mile away and down across the draw. So.
Do you have all the brush piled here to keep away from your stand?
You know, to be honest, that's where that fell. But at the same time, that was a consideration that they're just not going straight down to our stand from right here. We're a little blocked. I like that when we can come in and shoot over brush into a nice opening like that. Someone just reminded me, they're asking questions about food plots and use. We were talking about, I see a lot of grid pattern type. I was at a property in Michigan. Most of these are Michigan things, but grid pattern 1 acre food plot where they had about 8 boxes in there that were surrounded by miscanthus grass. And the theory is the buck will have to go from one to the next to look in there and see if there's does. But what I find is they just avoid the whole area. They might go bed it, and that's what he's been seeing for about 8 years since he did that, that they come in, they might get one picture in October. And so I like those bigger open food plots. How many times have you gone by an ag field and you've seen several nice bucks and does out there all together? And that's not too uncommon for them all to post up out in an open field. You have 40 deer in a 10 acre food plot. So at some point, and I think it was relating to wolves, and I know Kevin O'Brien asked that, if Kevin's still here, but yeah, Kevin. But like wolves up in northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin area, UP and Michigan, where if you compartmentalize those food plots too much, then those deer don't want to be in there because they just have a natural predator awareness where if there's a wall between Dylan and I, they don't know what's there at Dylan. And so why are they going to feed right here happily and move around there if they don't know what's on the other side? That was the whole idea of snow fencing, because it was, you know, you're putting snow fencing downwind to block deer from moving around downwind of you, but they don't like jumping it because they can't see across it. They don't know what's on the other side. So I like those bigger open plots. And then we have the smaller ones, but depending on where you're at, you can't get it, it can be too small because it's compartmentalized and the deer feel unsafe feeding in there. So, which is what we noticed with a lot of those compartmentalized plots. It sounded good on paper, but after 15 years of seeing that and taking them out, like he's taking them all out, he's moving his miscanthus, you can transplant it. He'll have some use for it, but you know, really good use because it's already established, it's tall and strong. But that open plot area, we're actually doubling the size of it. And that was part of it too. We want more deer feeding there, so we're gonna make it more inviting for them. So instead of those bucks coming in mid-October and leaving for the rest of the season, they come one time, they see it and they don't like it, then hopefully it'll be an open invitation for them. But.
So like central Minnesota, some of the spots that I hunt, like if you didn't have the terrain features here, right, of these steep drops and everything to be able to work around, let's say there was 20 foot of elevation that was different throughout this whole, 40 acre section. This piece that you have set up right now, would you access this stand differently then, or would you not have a stand here at all? Or
look at it this way: if this was entire flat, all the way out to the first switchgrass where we went to, so let's say a 40 acre square, and I had all my food on that side with ag at, I'd have a trail going all the way around this back side so I could slip into a nice bedding area with diverse habitat, even if it was flat, and be on that downwind backside. And so,
like browse and stuff that's down back over there, you're not going to be concerned about.
I'm going to try to not make browse down there. I'm going to try to make the bedding value higher in here, so that even if there's browse on the backside, there's a lot more reason for them to be in here. But then you go through that depth of cover. If the food is over there 250 yards, they don't want to go 400 yards back. Those does are all going to pack in around that food, and then you're in that buck area. So there's a certain distance where you go back, where even on a 40 acre parcel you can get around. And then you have that established assemblage of stands where you have morning stands closer to the bedding and you're coming in on the back side of them. Hopefully you're making a travel corridor for them. You're putting a mock scrape on it. You're creating better habitat cuttings from that point of your mock scrape going forward. And that's why it's so critical, like in a 40-acre parcel, if your food's located in the wrong spot in the middle, you don't have that depth to work with where you have an assemblage of morning stands here, bedding stands there, because the bedding stands are probably all on your neighbors, if they even get to that age. So you're just hunting pass through, you're waiting for deer to come on and off your property in the form of bucks in that case. So even if it's flat, that still boils down to that same depth that you have to have.
I was wondering for this specific setup and stuff, what time of the morning would you get here? Like before dawn?
Yeah, you've had some good questions. That one I like because I look at it like you really have to assess where the deer might be before it gets daylight. And so before daylight, the thermals are settling downhill. So before the sun comes up and brings those thermals uphill, then they're just saturating down below. So if I get in here an hour and a half early, the whole time I'm sitting here, I'm saturating the lower level down 150 yards, almost to the bottom probably of my scent. So I want to get in here more just in time. You're using gray light, you get in here, and then it's not that long before the temperatures start going up, the sun comes up, and your thermals go uphill. So I call it more just in time. You're using the darkness, especially like if we were cutting down the switchgrass over there, if we were cutting through there to get down to that trail, I'm cutting through there where we almost need a flashlight still, and I use like a little half lumens or 1 lumens beam light. It goes up to like 1,000 or 800, but it goes up really high, but I'm using a really low light. So anyways, you can go down through there, it'd be still almost dark. By the time you're getting back here, it's just starting to where within 10 minutes it's shooting light. So yeah, just whereas if I was crossing an open field, we have some stands like the Blade Plot where I shot Kermit a couple years ago. If you hunt there in the morning, Dylan and I waited out on the edge by Jim's camper waiting for deer to clear off the field. He got a pretty cool shot of a young buck going across in front of us, but we had to wait for the deer to clear the field, so we went into that at least a half hour after daylight. Yeah. We were up on the hill right about shooting light, but we had to wait quite a while to get in there. Finally, it was one of those where they're deer, we just said, we're just going in. Yeah. You know, we kind of had to worry about, we just went in.
Blowing them off of a major, like an ag food source.
Yes. Not necessarily right where we were watching the movement. Still don't like blowing them off. I don't think we saw anything that morning, did we? Or if we did, it was a small buck.
The morning that he was bailing or whatever he was doing.
Yeah. We're out there, we got in, it seemed quiet. We're waiting, it was a nice cold front morning. And all of a sudden he started bailing the corn stubble. Yeah. Right within like 50 yards or 100 yards of us on the edge. So, oh well.
Do you have a deer blowing at you when you come up to a setup like this? Do you just sit down or is your hunt screwed?
I would if I didn't have any other options. I'd still sit in here and enjoy the sit and try to put it out of my head as much as I can. But yeah, if I have options and I go into one stand and I make them a large noise, pull my bow into something, just do something stupid, then even if I don't hear that deer blow, if I have another option, a lot of times I'll get down and go to the next stand. What I was saying that about Dylan is he's saying it's 4 o'clock right now and we should start heading back. Ray still have to give his talk. We still have some prizes to draw. I'm going to text ahead or call ahead right now, tell them when they were coming back. I'm going to tell them to draw the kids prizes because there's a lot of kids prizes, and that when we get back, we don't have to go. Last year we went through like 200 kid prizes, and it was literally each kid got like 5 prizes. It was a lot. So I'm gonna call ahead, and then we can get back and have Ray give his talk, and then we'll give out the big prizes, and you guys can be on your way. So I hope it. You know, I'd rather run later. I don't mind. I always tell my clients I don't work on a time frame. So, and meaning we're not leaving at 5 or 6. It's kind of whatever it takes. And so I'd rather just keep here and, you know, answering your questions, but someone else might have a time frame back at the house. Folks, I want to make sure you check out my web class video series, whether it's how to design your food plot program or how to design your property in general. And we have a new one coming out that'll be how to hunt the rut. But these bucks back here are a testament. Some of these bucks go back to 93. They're even in different states. I urge you to check out those web classes so that you can help yourself, help your land, help your hunt. The link is in the description. And also for those that have tried them out, I encourage you to offer some feedback in the comments below. Thank you.